All right, everyone, we're going to get started. So welcome to our first meeting. We had an orientation 3 weeks ago, but this is our actual first meeting, so welcome and thank you for being here. I'm just going to start with a little bit of housekeeping and logistics and then hand it over to Dave and Matt. Few things. We do have interpreters in the back, Spanish interpreters if anyone needs it. And where are the interpreters? Sorry, can you guys make the announcement really quick as well? Okay, thank you. A number of you, because I forgot to mention it last meeting, forgot to validate your parking. So there is parking validation in the back. I don't want to be responsible for that. So I'll probably mention that 4 or 5 times over. So a few things. We're going to talk a little bit about the agenda. You have an agenda item for this meeting marked Brown Act training. So that is a state requirement, and because the City Council appointed the membership of this group, it is what we would refer to as a Brown Acted group. So we were going to do a little bit of training on that, but the city attorney who is responsible for that is apparently very ill and not going to be here tonight. So we're going to move that back to next meeting. So I'm sorry that we're not able to do that. We'll discuss this a little bit later on, kind of one of the requirements I need you guys to know about. But one of the things that we actually need to do as a Brown Acted group, which we were even kind of unaware of on our side, on the staff side, is we actually need you to approve the meeting minutes. So I know last time we talked about we're not going to go through big voting procedures and all of this, but I was wrong and lied, so I apologize. So with the meeting minutes, it's fairly simple. I know that we have some members here that weren't here last time. You can vote yes or no on it, but whoever decides to make the motion and a second had to be here at the last meeting, is the way the rules of order works. So, Maria, you have a question?
I noticed that.
And by the way, can you please use the microphone? And let me interrupt you really quick. We have made improvements to City Hall AV, so everyone knock on wood that we don't have the problems that we had last time. And then our staff actually figured out how we can dual broadcast. So Planning Commission is going on, or will be going on pretty soon, but this is also, unlike the orientation, being broadcast live on the city website, so audio and visual. Maria?
I just had a question about the minutes. I noticed that the minutes don't capture any of the conversations that the group had, and I'm curious moving forward how that will be captured, particularly key questions and thoughts that are raised by this group.
Yeah, excellent question. So moving forward, you're really going to see 2 documents, and you did see 2 documents. One was in an email. So we are going to follow very standard kind of summary meeting minutes per the Brown Act that we need to follow. All city council committees and commissions will follow the format that's in front of you now. Because we're doing a deeper dive on issues, you are going to see something prior to meetings, like facilitator notes that Dave and Matt will be responsible giving to us and that we'll send out. And that will kind of, you'll start to see the themes and the conversations emerge through those documents as well. And I believe kind of moving forward, we'll ensure that that captures kind of the previous meetings as well. Sarah?
Are those facilitator notes available to the public?
Yes, they are. They're going to be put up online as well, along with the meeting minutes. Teresa?
Move approval for the minutes.
Second.
Okay. All in favor? Aye. Any disagreement? Okay. You can abstain if you'd like, since you weren't here, but even if you weren't here, you're allowed to vote on it. So we have a fairly, even with the cancellation of the Brown Act training, we do have a fairly robust agenda tonight. We're going to do a little bit up front on kind of the content and data that we had talked about, and then get a little bit of a deeper dive in kind of roles and responsibility follow-up from last meeting and kind of the path forward for us all. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dave.
Thank you very much, Lee. Great to see you all again tonight. Thank you for being here, and good to see some new faces. As Lee mentioned, we do have a very packed agenda tonight. We're going to start with an orientation summary, which will cover some of the notes that were sent out from the last meeting. And we're also going to talk about some group agreements as well. We're then going to get into city planning goals, give you a context of other related planning efforts that have gone on and that very much relate to this effort. roles and operation of this of the SOG. We heard from you all that that's something we definitely want to provide some clarity on, and we will here tonight. And then we're also going to talk about the community engagement plan, other activities happening outside of just the SOG meetings to get your input on those as well, followed by public comment and then next steps. Okay, so starting with the group agreements. As we talked about last time, we definitely want to create a space that's safe, that's open, that's fun, really to kind of allow you all to share freely. And we talked about this last time. We actually have it in your packets as well. And these are the group agreements that we came up with based on the input we got from you all that we can go through real quickly here just to make sure we captured everything correctly. And we'll go through these at the beginning of every meeting just to make sure that we're all in agreement of how we're going to respect and treat each other throughout this process. So just real quickly, recognize that one person speaks at a time and all others are active listeners. And I want to remind you, when you do have something to say, if you could please turn your nameplate to the side so that I can see that you want to speak, and then we can call on you and make it open that way. Allow everyone the opportunity to speak and share their ideas. Build and maintain safe space. We will not tolerate attacks on individuals, institutions, or perspectives. Put yourself in each other's shoes and respect each other. Seek to understand diverse viewpoints and ask questions for clarification. Be open-minded and allow your perspective to evolve based on others' ideas. Represent the diverse community, recognizing that not all community members are represented at the table. No got you moments. We want to keep interactions very positive and encouraging. Expect that conflicting opinions and disagreements are natural and to be expected. Work to find common ground and solutions where everyone can win. We recognize the best outcomes are those that incorporate the range of perspectives. Recognize the intent is to move towards solutions or desired outcomes, and work together to think big and create an innovative and forward-thinking project. And lastly, maybe most importantly, is have fun and make new friends, because we're all here to work together. So any other input on these group agreements before we kind of finalize them? And we'll have these printed at the next meeting on the wall. Again, it's something to come back to as we go through every meeting here forward. Any input? Am I missing any? Yes, Harvey.
Make a request.
Sure.
I'm older and my vision isn't quite as good. That's very hard for me to.
Yes, it's actually printed in.
No, I understand,
yes.
but when you're creating slides,
Yes.
can you break them up into 2 slides rather than 1 if you need to pack it?
That's a great suggestion, Harvey. We appreciate that. Yes, great suggestion. Any other input there? No? Okay, great. So we'll have those again printed out in very large letters to make sure everyone can read them clearly moving forward. So at the orientation meetings, we had a lot of great input. We talked through some information about how you want this process to run, as well as what you want the content to be moving forward. This is a bulleted list of the feedback that we heard. I could go through these again here real quickly, and you could let me know if there's anything missing. It was to clarify the role and decision-making process and final product of the SAG through this process in 2018. And you'll see that in this presentation today, we're going to get into that and provide more clarity. Receive background information for the project to build off of work done to date. Again, we'll be talking about a lot of that tonight in the planning efforts that have gone on. Allow the SOG members an opportunity to share their ideas, expertise, and experience. That's inherent in everything we're going to do here, but we'll also have a panel discussion tonight where you'll hear from some SOG members, and moving forward, you'll see that we're going to have opportunities for every SOG member to provide their perspective. We call them TED Talks kind of version we're going to have moving forward, so that should be fun. Create a space for interested SOG members to dig deeper. We'll talk about that tonight as well, but we've developed what we're calling solution groups, where we're going to dive deep into the hot topics that come out of this process, and we'll provide some more information there. Provide information prior to each meeting. We definitely will do a better job of that starting with the next meeting. We're going to provide you with information of what we're going to cover at each meeting. We're going to be giving you some homework, access to resources, all that. This is moving all very fast. We're going to get ahead of the game and make sure we have that available for you. Provide opportunities for the community to be engaged in the process. We'll talk about that tonight as well. And then be transparent about the process and outcomes, and we'll talk about how that will be integrated as well. So before we move away from this process slide, any input from you all as to anything that maybe wasn't captured at the last meeting? No? Great. On we go. And this is more about the content. It kind of feeds into some of the group agreements we had and what we want to talk about here. But do something big, a bold project, and a model for the country. These are, again, input that we received directly from you all. A place to live, work, play, and mix of uses and affordable housing, contribute or catalyze a downtown where everyone always hoped it would be. Avoid and mitigate displacement. A project that's equitable, sustainable, and resilient. Create a diverse and vibrant public places. Have a world-class transportation system, and build a project that works for all people of San Jose. Very broad strokes, but this again captures a lot of the input that we received as to what we hope this process will include. Any input there, if anything we might not have captured? All right, we're doing well. On we go. So one thing that I realized I didn't cover as part of the group agreements is one thing that came up during our last meeting was a disclosure of relationships on the SOG. We're going to be sending out a document to you all just as an optional opportunity to provide any input if there's relationships that you all have with any city members, any other SOG members, or Google, and that will be made open to the public as well, but that'll be a document sent around as an optional basis for you all to provide that input. That's one thing I forgot to note earlier. I think that covers it. If, any questions? Yes.
Can you define relationship?
Can I define relationship?
Yeah.
Do you want to take that, Lee?
Your answer is no? I think I know.
I'll let Lee answer that.
People in this room, financial.
What kind of consultant are you, man? So, you know, I think the tenure of the conversation last time, if I were to kind of pinpoint two things, if you had any financial relationship, your organization with the city, another SOG member, Google, or a lot of you are on boards, and so is there, you know, a relationship at a board level, your organization and the city, or any other SAG member? So I would say it kind of boils down to those two things in my mind.
Is taking place in the context of existing plans that are in place for our city, and that our work builds on the work of probably thousands of people that have been involved in creating the city's growth plan, which is the Envision 2040 general plan, have been involved in creating the downtown strategy plan, have been involved creating the Diridon Station area plan, and have been involved on the Good Neighbor Committee that created the principles and the implementation framework. So we're here tonight to dive just a little bit more into that planning context. And we have two presenters. The first one is my pleasure to introduce Rosalind Huey. Rosalind is the acting director of the Department of Planning, Building, and Code Enforcement. One thing I love about Rosalind is that she has deep experience before she came to San Jose 3 years ago in Washington, D.C. She was the deputy director for all citywide planning and neighborhood planning in Washington, D.C. So she's been deeply involved in the transition, transformation, and urban development. And she was asked to step into the acting department director role last June, and I find her to be just a very inspiring leader. So I'm happy to have her here tonight. So Rosalind's going to give us a little bit about the Envision 2040 plan. And then my other inspiring colleague, Nancy Klein, who's our director of real estate, is going to talk about the basics of the Diridon Station area plan. Nancy was deeply involved in the creation of this plan, along with our planning department and Department of Transportation. And then we're going to have two brief, roughly 10, 12-minute presentations, and then we're going to take questions. So we're going to ask you, what about this information is interesting or relevant, and what other questions does it raise?
Thanks, Kim. And I am delighted to be with you this evening to talk about our city's general plan. And so I'm an urban planner by training and at heart. I've been doing this for 30 years, and you'll probably have to excuse me. I get really excited about general plans for cities. I think they're great, great documents, and because they really do set the framework, the blueprint for how a city is going to grow and develop over the long term. And so we're really fortunate here in the city of San Jose that we've got a great general plan in place. We have a great vision, and we have specific goals and strategies that are going to help us achieve our vision. And so with that, you see here on the slide, I've mentioned, so our city's general plan is the blueprint for how the city's going to grow and develop over the long term. It's a policy document with specific goals and strategies in a number of different areas, and I'll go over those shortly. And then lastly, I think it's important to realize that our city's general plan really is a tool that's used for decision making. So city departments are making their decisions, based upon the goals and strategies in our general plan. Our commissions are making their decisions, and obviously our city council are making their decisions based on the ideas and the strategies identified in the general plan. So how do we get to our current general plan? Our current general plan, it was approved by the City Council back in November of 2011. And there was an enormous amount of community engagement involved in the process. Now, I wasn't around, but I understand that over the period of 4 years, there were multiple task force meetings held. I see many faces here around the table that participated in those multiple task force meetings. There were hundreds of community meetings and other avenues to engage the community. So at the end of the day, the city engaged over 5,000 residents in producing this document. So I think that's pretty remarkable. And actually, one of our key strategies in our general plan is based on community-based planning. And so we think that's very important in terms of establishing and developing these documents. So I mentioned earlier, we have several strategies in our general plan. Our plan includes 12 specific strategies, and these cover a variety of topics and areas, from focused growth to our concept for urban villages, to the city really wanting to design our streetscapes for people and not just cars. We have a focus on downtown, so we have very specific strategies about how we want our downtown to be a destination and how we see that growing and developing over the long term. And another important element is that, the participants in this process decided that we wanted to be a healthy city, so we have specific strategies about how our neighborhoods and communities can grow in a way that's healthy, and so that's another very important component. So all of these strategies together really do focus on our overarching vision for growing in a way that's more urban. So our vision is for a city that's growing in a way that's more urban. We've decided that we're urbanizing, so we're transitioning from our history of suburban development to one that's more urban in nature. So we're growing up and not out, so no more of the sprawling development, but wanting to grow up and add density in the areas that have been identified. We've decided that we want to be a city for people. We want to be a city of great places that focuses on people's experiences in those places. Another key goal is that we really do want and need to become a more balanced city. And I'll share a little bit more about where we stand in terms of
our residential development versus how many jobs we're actually able to create here in the city. And then lastly, we want to be a city that achieves environmental sustainability. Clearly, we know, particularly in our region, the importance and the unique role, I think, that the city of San Jose can play in terms of environmental sustainability. So this plan, this general plan, accommodates significant growth. And I want to spend just a little bit of time here. So the city is projected to grow rapidly between now and 2040. So we're expecting, and this is based on population projections, we are expected to grow by really over 470,000 new people between now and 2040. That's a significant amount of growth. The U.S. Census actually every year provides estimates on how cities across the country are growing. I remember when I checked, I think it was back in 2016, they came out with their estimates. At that time, San Jose was actually adding 1,100 new residents each month. And so when we did that calculation, and if we continue to grow that way, if we're literally adding 1,100 new residents every month, we are definitely going to meet this projection of 470,000 new residents by 2040. At the same time, our general plan is very aspirational in terms of adding jobs to the city. And so we are planning to add nearly 400,000 new jobs between now and 2040. So how are we going to accommodate all of this growth? And this is really the key component of our general plan, and laying out the strategies of where this growth is going to be targeted. And so we're being very deliberate. We've decided, where this growth is going to occur. So we've identified specific growth areas where we want to really focus on mixed-use development. So we want to have a mix of uses. Our history has been one of, we've had segregated land uses. So we've had, our subdivisions of single-family homes, and then we have big office parks that are located far from them. So in the future, we want to grow in a way that's more mixed use in nature. Focusing this growth on major transit corridors, that's going to be the key for the city and really for the region. To accommodate all the growth that we're going to have to place the development. We're going to have to place the housing and the jobs along our major transit corridors. And then obviously we want to maintain our important, very important employment centers. So we have very strong policies about retaining our employment lands. They are crucial for our city. These are the lands that we're going to accommodate the growth in jobs. And so we're very clear and deliberate about not converting these employment lands to residential uses. And so then the specific growth areas, so obviously we have huge opportunity for downtown, which includes Diridon, to accommodate this growth. We have specific plan areas such as Communications Hill, Midtown, Jackson Taylor, and Martha Gardens, where these plans have already been developed with community members, and so these are areas that can receive this growth. North San Jose, obviously, that is a key district in the city where we want to accommodate significant growth in jobs as well as residential units as well. And then lastly, probably, I wouldn't say most importantly, but very importantly, is our concept for urban villages. So many of you are probably aware we have about 70 different urban villages identified across the city, and these are the key areas where we expect to accommodate this additional growth and development. And one thing about the urban villages, we are planning for places that are truly great places, a mix of uses. They're going to be rich in amenities and services and amenities that people want to walk to and not necessarily have to drive to, and also be able to accommodate job development as well. So to talk a little bit more about our aspirations for more jobs, probably many of you have heard the term that we use here in the city. It's a ratio that's called jobs to employed resident ratio. And so this graph here shows that for every employed resident in the city of San Jose, how many jobs in the city that we have available. So you'll see here that for every employed resident, we only have 0.85 job available to them. So in essence, what this means is that the city doesn't have enough jobs for all of the employed residents here, and this forces our residents to have to go to other jurisdictions for their employment. And so you can see here in the graph how other cities in the Bay Area are faring out regarding their jobs to employed resident ratio. You know, at the end of the spectrum, we have Palo Alto. Their ratio is 3, right? So triple, right, of where we are. And so this actually speaks to, again, the imbalance that we have throughout our entire region in terms of jobs and housing. And so it's very interesting. We're pretty unique here in the city of San Jose. So here in this chart, you'll see how we compare to other big cities across the United States. And the city of San Jose actually is the only big city that's actually a bedroom community. So in essence, during the day, we are sending our residents to other cities for employees instead of having residents from other cities coming into San Jose for their jobs. And it's very interesting. I don't know if you can see all of the cities, but you know, it goes all the way up to Houston. You know, even for the city of Detroit, you know, they are actually doing a better job in terms of having enough jobs for their residents within their city limits. So to talk about why we want to grow in a way that's more balanced, there are lots and lots of benefits to that, obviously. So probably number one to many of us here is the reduced traffic congestion, right? To help out with our commuting, having the availability for people to not spend so much time alone in their cars. Having the opportunity as we grow our jobs to actually locate these jobs closer to our residents, to where people are living. Obviously, the benefit of improving our air quality and just our overall quality of life. If you're not spending as much time in your car, you have more time to do other things that you'd like to do for yourself and for your family and friends as well. And then also importantly, you know, it's so important for us to grow in a more balanced way to help the city fiscally in terms of being able to provide the city services that our residents want and need. So this slide here shows, right, we have over 60% of our employed residents, they actually leave the city for their jobs every day. And yeah, again, mentioning the opportunity to reduce the commuting time so we have more time to do things that we enjoy. Next slide. Improving our air quality. So one important factoid here I'll share with you is that actually 54% of the city's emissions actually comes from transportation. So we're spending a lot of time in our vehicles. And so to the extent that we can reduce that, we're definitely going to improve our air quality. And I'll just note that just last month, our city council approved the Climate Smart San Jose, and this is our plan for a low carbon city, which actually implements, right, all of the goals and the strategies that we have in our general plan for sustainability leadership. And again, I mentioned earlier the importance of making sure that the city has the budget, is fiscally strong in order to provide the needed services to our residents and our businesses. And the current imbalance makes it increasingly challenging to be able to do that. So in terms of how the city fares regarding its property taxes, you'll see here in this chart, again, in the yellow, the city of San Jose, our property tax per capita is about $140 as compared to other cities in the Bay Area. Cupertino's at $285. Palo Alto at the other end of the spectrum, $407 per capita. And then going on to the impacts on our sale taxes. So here you'll see the city of San Jose, we're about $142 per capita. And then other cities are just way, way beyond us. So the need to close that gap is so important for the city. And then one of the, I think, very aspirational and aggressive goals in our general plan is our aggressive mode shift goals. So you'll see here that currently, well, actually this was probably back in 2011, 10% of our residents were actually driving alone as compared to 90% who were using other modes of transportation. Oh, I'm sorry, vice versa. In terms of biking, walking, and using transit. And so our general plan has a goal to make that shift to 40, 60%. And talking about transportation and reducing traffic congestion and taking advantage of our existing transit investments and really fully leveraging the new investments that we know are coming, Diridon Station really is a crucial component of that. So you'll see here in this slide the amount of trips, over 8,700 trips going in and out of the station. With a 2040 daily trip projection of 69,000 trips throughout Diridon Station. So again, this is a crucial area for our city in terms of helping us meet our goals, focusing the residential development and the job growth, and really taking full advantage of all of the rich transit investments that we have. And then lastly, just to spend a little time talking about the integration of Diridon and downtown. I remember when I first came here, our downtown is a wonderful, wonderful place, but it's a small place. And so to the extent that we can integrate Diridon Station area to downtown and actually grow downtown is going to be so very critical. And currently, our department, and we're partnering with other city departments, we're actually updating our downtown strategy in EIR so that we can add additional development capacity to downtown, given the fact that we have the transit investments coming. Our plan is to add about 4,000 residential units to downtown and about 10,000 new jobs. So again, the importance of focusing the growth in the right areas, adding the density along our transit corridors and hubs, absolutely critical for us reaching our goals in our general plan. And I think with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nancy, who's going to give you an overview of the Diridon Station area plan.
Rosalind, thank you so very much. And I just wanted to say good evening, Nancy Klein, the Director of Real Estate. And I'm very, very excited to be here with you tonight. You hear excited a lot because we all get to work on this together, and that is very gratifying. And I also want to say it's wonderful to look around the table and see a great number of people who we've gotten to work together before, and look forward to meeting and working with a great number of new folks. The Diridon Station area plan, I went back just to make sure we did a little work, and I also want to give a shout out to Michael Brio, who's in the back of the room, who was a cohort who also worked extensively. Michael heads up long-term development for Roseland. So later on, if you want to talk, we're both here to answer questions. But the Diridon Station area plan actually got started in 2009. So we've been talking about this area because we knew this was coming. And so a lot of good work had gone on, many months of collaborative work with a great number of community stakeholders, including the transit agencies, began and worked all the way through 2009 and 2011. After that time, went to council with an approval of the bones of the plan and then set out to do an environmental impact report. So I just found it very exciting. You see some of the components of the long-term goals, but I also pulled up the memo and just wanted to read part of what was listed as the guiding principles, because I think it's comforting to know there's some consistency here. Create a great place in the city of San Jose that is both a local and regional destination. Establish a land use plan and policy framework to guide future development, which supports transit ridership, fosters economic development, and creates a world-class destination. Improves pedestrian, bicycle, transit, and automobile connectivity between the station and the adjacent uses. Creates a highly active and lively, welcoming pedestrian and bike-friendly environment. And develop and implement an urban design that promotes a vibrant and well-connected destination area. So some of the things that I'm guessing that we've got here will resonate and carry us forward. With the common themes, Kim, if you'll hit the next one, thank you. You'll see some of those echoed, not only in the vibrant realm, but also carrying on a spirit of innovation and cooperation that we enjoy unparalleled in some respects here in San Jose, as well as art. And back in 2011, noting the importance of art in communicating and enriching what we do in San Jose. The next slide. Overall, that development capacity, which again was really looking at from a window of 2011, set about 5 million square feet of development overall, which would of office overall, which also would include 420,000 square feet of retail, about 2,500 homes, and 900 hotel rooms. So that is the overall area. You see the three bubbles, north, central, south, blue, pink, orange, and they're designed as distinct areas with different purposes. I'm just going to walk very briefly through the three areas. To the north, we looked at an innovation district with jobs that were co-working and incubators, and looking at this also being a little more industrial as well as R&D oriented, with 3 million square feet of office, 80,000 square foot of retail, not much in the way of homes, and then a very successful SAP center. That'll make Jim Goddard happy. And then in the central zone, which is the key area, of course, around Diridon, and was at that time intended to be home to the baseball park, with office emphasis, transit, and entertainment retail, a little over 1 million square feet of office planned, 140,000 square feet of retail, 250 hotel rooms, and a ballpark. In the southern zone, it was intended to be more of an emphasis on a residential mix. That's where the roughly 2,400 homes are planned in to be, about 800,000 square feet of office, and then about 650 hotel rooms. So that, in summary, gives you a sense of the overall mix of development in Diridon, and how the areas at the thinking time from 2011 baked into the EIR and then approved by the council with a lot of community input in 2014. Thank you.
I want to thank Rosalind and Nancy. That's a very quick tour of about 600 or 800 pages of planning documents, which you can read if you like. We wanted to hit the highlights now, and then we can keep using these planning documents as touchstones to keep coming back. So before we bring up some neighbors who were involved in the Good Neighbor Committee, we want to take a little pause and see if there was any part of what you've heard from Rosalind or Nancy that seems particularly important or relevant to you. And then are there additional questions you have or additional information that you think you would like? Yes, Leslie.
So I'm curious that we're looking at almost double the square footage of employment lands or employment uses there. From a planning perspective, what does that mean, and why weren't we thinking that big a few years back?
So in planning, it's always difficult to predict the future. And so what I
Test one.
One quick thing to add, keep in mind that on the baseball site itself, you didn't see capacity for development. So now, since baseball is not coming, you have that space to take density.
The 2040 plan and Rosalind's presentation emphasized for the additional housing to be careful about the housing versus jobs to address the housing imbalance. I was curious what planning's initial comments about the current form of SB 827 would be, and the obvious impact on housing density and housing units that that would have if it was applied to the current areas as the committee bill has.
I can take a quick start at that. I mean, San Jose, as you know, we're completely committed to housing. We have 120,000 carry of units in our general plan. So we're very much thinking about density in and around the station. So we're already on board, pardon the pun. But we also need to be careful about proximity, because we know from many studies that it's very useful to have jobs right on top of the station, because that increases transit ridership. But the goal, following on what Rosalind had shared, was that how we integrate that density and do that together. So you aren't hearing us say we don't support housing, we absolutely do.
So I appreciate the discussion so far about the difference, I guess, between what we saw laid out in the presentation and what's in the station plan, and perhaps what Google's planning. I think it's a helpful distinction that the planning area is about a 240-acre planning area. I think the Google project, we don't have a lot of details about it, but we've heard somewhere between 40 and 50 acres perhaps. And if they're building out 8 million square foot in that 40 to 50 acres, there's going to have to be significant increases in allowable heights, a number of general planning amendments, a number of specific area planning amendments, a whole lot of rezoning changes. What are your thoughts on, given that those changes will likely significantly increase the value of both the public lands that are still either in negotiation or we have a set price on, or the privately purchased lands that Google's bought? What are your thoughts on policies to ensure the public is capturing some of the value of those potential changes, since we're talking about excitement around potentially altering the plan to make room for what Google wants?
I'll begin quickly there, thank you. Great point. So a couple different things. We want to make sure, and it's absolutely happening, that Google is paying fair market value for land. That's by law what's happening. That's already expressed intent by council. And then in addition to that, we will be working as a group on community benefits. And we will look at the metrics and benchmark what other communities are doing. There is a policy link group, which Jackie Ferran Morales-Fran and others in this room actually as part of, that will be working on best in breed, best practice to look at community benefits that will translate to capture the value. So I don't know, and I don't think any of us can say exactly how that will happen at this moment, but that is in what part of the input that we're asking for from the SOG to help guide the future.
Just one clarification on that. The price for the SARA-owned lands, they're priced out for what it's zoned for now, what the current planning is now. So that's not capturing the actual market value after any adjustments are made, correct?
Actually,
like if you read the appraisal, it says, it has the FARs based on the current planning and planning for that you can build at 7 levels. So it's pretty specific about not being adjusted for, future changes in allowable heights or densities or general planning amendments and the rest of it.
you will find, anybody around the room will find that appraisal is very much art, not science. And that if you look back a year ago, price in Dearborn was literally going for $90 a square foot. So other people would say, other appraisals would say that they're already baked in the price for development, when right now we only have a zoning. You're supposed to get an appraisal at current value. That's what appraisals do. It's at current value, and currently it's an industrial value.
So that's the distinction I just want to make, that it'll be worth more after these changes are made, and that's not baked into the price, so it's not the fair market price after those points.
They're pulling the hook at me, but happy to talk.
Okay, I'm going to take one more question. Again, we can keep coming back with additional questions over many months. So Harvey, you had your...
In 2008 through 2011, or 2007 to 2011, I was on the 2040 plan, and we were pushing to get the jobs housing imbalance corrected because we couldn't pay for city services. In 2015, was it? 16. The review, we were presented a plan that said that indeed housing could actually pay for itself, would produce enough revenues if it was built at a certain number per acre. And was that 90 an acre or?
It's about 55 to 60 dwelling units per acre.
Per acre, okay. So this would be certainly something that we would produce in this area.
Yes.
So it will pay for itself.
Oh,
Yes.
And then some. Okay, thank you.
Great, well, thank you. We'll wrap up this section, and now we're going to turn to some actual neighbors who were involved in the Good Neighbor Committee. And so we have 5 folks, some of you who are on the advisory group, that are going to come on down.
So I can ask Leslie, Harvey, and Kevin to join me here, and since Pete and Jonathan are right here, they'll be right in front of us. So the 5 of them were on the Good Neighbor Committee. So they're the original 5, or I don't know, I couldn't come up with a better name. And so we wanted to, this process of the Good Neighbor Committee kind of went in parallel to it started a little bit before the Diridon Station area planning effort, and kind of helped inform that. But if you open your binders, I believe it is under resources. You can see the Good Neighbor Committee report. It was much more of a tactical document in a lot of ways. It kind of spoke to, what really needed to happen on the ground. We'll probably come back to this document a few times, but I thought it was important, especially some of the follow-up we did after the last orientation, for you to hear directly from the 5 of them. Kind of not just with the report, but also process or anything else. So I do want to give kind of each member a chance just to do kind of a quick 30-second, what was the most important or relevant thing as a part of the original report that they focused on and still think is relevant today. And we'll start with Jonathan. It is.
Actually, Nancy's presentation was what my recollection was.
That's the other thing. We have to use the mic so the millions of people watching online can hear us.
Nancy's presentation was what I remembered most about the Diridon Good Neighbor Committee. There was a lot of things in there that she highlighted and went over that I remember most. I thought that was a nice, refreshing memory of what we did.
Great.
One of the things that was most important for me as North Willow Glen, we were also facing high-speed rail potentially coming through the North Willow Glen neighborhood and dividing it and taking out parkland and housing. So one of the things that was most important to me was to anything that came of this did not impact the existing neighborhoods or impacted them the least, and made improvements to the neighbors in Parkland and again, as I said last meeting, daylighted the Los Gatos Creek Trail.
Okay, yeah, Nancy did a very good job of looking at many of the things that we did, but the things that I remember the most, I think, were placemaking, making a destination, and also iconic architecture. And I think, to get on the soapbox just a little bit, that with the airport in the position that it's in, and the height restrictions that we have, a lot of people diss our skyline because of what it is or can be. And I think that what we ought to do is embrace our, what I call the Borg cube kind of aspect, if any of you are into Star Trek. And we can do great architecture within the cube itself by just adhering to articulation and textures and that sort of thing. So, there's other aspects too, but I think with that, I better pass along the mic.
So what I recall is a real mindfulness around how people circulate, both towards downtown, so making obvious bike-friendly, pedestrian-friendly pathways into downtown, as well as back west into the neighborhoods and into the Alameda Business District. And the one thing that sticks with me too is the economic study about the impact of a ballpark. They came back and said there's intangibles about having a major league sports in your town. However, the highest and best economic use would be if there were a corporate campus on the site. So here we are.
The problem with going last is everybody eats up all your material. I agree with Kevin that basically the art and the iconic structure is what I remember most of it, and with Leslie, both the circulation, the traffic patterns, the lack of traffic patterns, et cetera, are more important. I think the big difference between this panel and the last one we had is really the focus on the ballpark. If you remember right, the ballpark was imminent, it was going to happen, it was really any day, and I certainly felt swept up in that discussion. And then it went away, and there was kind of a flatness. This is a much better program, it seems to me, in that it's a little more distributed. Yeah, it's one master developer in quote marks, but it seems to me like it's going to be an easier job for us to do. Thank you.
Great. So we're going to do 2 more questions, and just really quick. And this was kind of based off of some of what we heard, in between meetings from some of the committee members. But how do you think this group should build upon the work that you guys did? So you guys laid a really good foundation. What's next that the group should really focus on?
You go first. I gotta go that way. We'll just come back this way. That's it.
Gosh, I'm stumped by that one, to be honest with you. I'll pass.
We did talk last time about there not being dead zones, and I think the same thing is just making sure it's a really dynamic, not quite 24-hour, but maybe 18-hour a day facility where you've got restaurants and arts and culture and sports, of course, and just a very vibrant place.
Yeah, I think we talked about open air markets and things like that, a lot of artwork. Another thing that we could build on in this group that I think we had is we actually got along pretty well. We didn't have a whole lot of really controversy, so to speak. So I think that's why we were able to accomplish what we did, was because we were willing to work together.
And at the time, I was on a national panel for Kaiser Permanente, and I was going to various cities, and I'd come back and I'd say, why can't we have an area in San Jose like San Diego or San Antonio, the Riverwalk, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Went to all these cities, and I said, we need something vibrant that will bring us a destination. We have the weather, we have the climate, but we don't have a place yet. So that was my main thing.
Okay, the dynamics of a baseball stadium versus a corporate campus is going to change this significantly, at least how we looked at it. So to answer your question, I think we need to build on the idea that we're going to have a lot more people every single day versus 80 some odd days, because there's 162 baseball games. And then I think one of the challenges I think we might have is because if I remember correctly, Google has a cafeteria for their employees, so they're not really going to be eating in our restaurants that much. So that's a concern. And then, everything that Harvey had to say, I second that. So I think what we need to do is build on a new perspective. Instead of a baseball stadium, we got this corporate campus. One of the things that I do remember, and what Kevin was saying, is that we did get along because there were no hidden agendas, or people didn't come in with, well, you have to do this, or you have to do that. There was no hidden agendas. We all were in it together.
Great point. So last question. A lot has changed. It's, we're going from, a baseball stadium. And by the way, if you Google Diridon Station Good Neighbor Committee and look at images, that's what comes up. Where should the ballpark go? So we are in a much different conversation. And so, what's your advice to, us that are running the process, but to the rest of the group on how we actually pivot that process and focus on, something that has a greater use? Jonathan's absolutely right. 80 games versus, a company that's going to have 365 days of business and a robust activation of the surrounding area and station. Back to you, Jonathan.
What's the question again?
So how would, and maybe this is, an unfair question, but how does the conversation pivot, and how should we focus and kind of take the model of the Good Neighbor Committee and the collaboration there, but, focus that on, the station? And, quite honestly, the big thing that's not in the report that you guys see, which Leslie kind of alluded to, was, Kip Harkness and myself ran the Good Neighbor Committee process, and we didn't let the committee put, one of the recommendations in was, no matter what, the city has to go find a master developer, because at the time we kind of thought that was not a feasible solution on where the market was and where downtown was. So now we actually have the possibility of a master developer. So how do we pivot this conversation and kind of, move away from the ballpark and take the good stuff that you guys did and focus on the new use?
Well, in my opinion, I think there's so much overlapping. So we're gonna see some of the same challenges, issues, concerns. Just the other dynamic that's going to be changing is just the fact that it's going to be used every single day.
I was reading today a piece about transportation and how most public transportation systems in the country are losing ridership. And I think one of the things that we have to be very careful about in this area is to create connectivity, and to make the connectivity not for cars as much as it is for public transport and for bicycles and pedestrians.
This is a tough one. I think it's a matter of intensity. With a ballpark, we were looking at traffic patterns. We went to had some interesting studies on how traffic is rerouted for the Shark Tank and games, and how you get people in and out efficiently. And with a ballpark, with about 80,000, well, actually it was, I don't know, but maybe about. It was a small one. Yeah, it was a boutique park, but you still had this intensity of getting people in and out safely in a quick time, where now it's may not be as many people, I don't know, but it's going to be all the time. So that the idea of how the traffic patterns go is going to be a very interesting issue, and I think one of the keys there will be how we incorporate the residential housing units in with the Google campus, so that maybe people are walking instead of driving, that sort of thing.
For me, it's social equity. We're in the 2009, we were in the recession, and now we're in boom and land rush, and it's kind of nuts. And so how do we take advantage of any kind of tax incentives? There's a lot going on in Sacramento right now around housing, but how do we craft a project that really benefits as many people as possible without overburdening Google, but making sure that what comes out of here, it really benefits the entire community?
I think if you look at the generic nature of the maps that were thrown up before, the sort of the business area up at the top, the hotel area in the bottom, and then the residential or whatever it was in the center, it shows that we really didn't have any specific goals in mind. We kind of felt that there were things happening, but it was really a focus on the ballpark and what it might bring with it, and the rest of us came along for a ride. I don't think in any of our meetings we ever heard the words displacement or gentrification uttered at all. And maybe they didn't exist as much. I, for one, would really like to see us study those quite carefully and get some hard numbers around them. How many people are actually living in there are going to be moved out by this? Is this footprint bigger than the other? How will it ripple out from the actual station footprint itself? So those are my concerns on it.
Excellent points by all. Do any of the SAC members have any questions of your fellow colleagues in the original 5? Yes.
The last question, the last statement about how many people were being displaced, did you have a number for that, for the ballpark area and that design? What was the number for displacement of businesses and homes at that time?
Yeah, with the way that process ran, we actually never got to that level of detail. So this will be kind of a new topic, whether it be, the small business displacement or the housing displacement with this development. So this will be something new that we kind of confront together. But, as Pete said, it wasn't a term, it wasn't a concern, for a variety of reasons in 2009 when we began. Yes?
Matt Vanderslice with Greenbelt Alliance. I'm interested to hear more about how the conversation evolved around some of the placemaking features that integrated the creek and the other natural amenities. It seems like we've made a lot of progress on that front over the 5-6 years of the process, and interested to hear, since Michelle Beasley on our staff was around during that point, how you started from point A and arrived at point B around that, so that we can pick up where you were at point B.
Well, I think we were looking at opportunities. You have Los Gatos Creek, and so the opportunity to do creekside dining. You brought up the issue of potentially daylighting Los Gatos Creek, tying into the trails, and again, that's a great commute network for people walking or biking. We didn't honestly get into that level of detail. It was more conceptual. Let's make sure we take advantage of the Los Gatos Creek Trail, the Guadalupe River Trail, the closeness of Guadalupe River Park, and really make sure that that's integrated into the project. Art was, this notion of signature art pieces was a big part of it. Again, that there's this dynamic public space when you come out of the train station to go to the ballpark or go whatever we're doing. But it was really conscious about making this a really interesting place to be.
And I'll second that. And I kept coming back from, I had a couple of meetings during that time in San Antonio, which I thought was supposed to be a pit of a city. And it turned out the Riverwalk really attracted me. But I also was on, Leslie sends up shivers, because I also was working on riparian corridor policy, which means you need a setback, and they certainly didn't do that there. So we were looking at ways that we could incorporate the dining, the amenities along and use the creeks as your through to bring you there on bicycle, on foot, and go to the amenities along the creek.
Any other questions? Melanie?
Yes, I wanted to go back to Leslie's comment, maybe in the last round, where she talked about social equity. And I was wondering if thought had been given to creating a wide variety of types of jobs, not just the high-level jobs, but sort of the spectrum of jobs that would allow, variety of people to, reside in this area. I mean, some of the features you're talking about, wanting open-air markets and restaurants and that type of thing, lends itself to having a variety of people with a variety of jobs.
The focus was really ballpark, but we did talk about, again, not having dead zones. So we want restaurants, we want, small businesses, basically, that would keep an area vibrant. But maybe some other colleagues can provide detail.
Well, I know that one of the things that, since I'm in an adjoining neighborhood, that we were concerned about with the ballpark was that all we would get are these part-time jobs of, selling peanuts, popcorn, and candied apples and cleaning up the ballpark. So it was kind of, blue-collar type work. And we thought, wow, this is all we're going to get out of this. So, I think we were concerned about having a mix of jobs that had more of a professional orientation, more white collar, that sort of thing, jobs in the area, because we thought, wow, it's kind of like, because Gardner was originally populated, I'm not going to say originally, but when the Del Monte Cannery was there, many of the people from our neighborhood would walk from Gardner to the Del Monte Cannery to work. So it was very much, blue collar type work. So we didn't want to have a repeat of that. We wanted to have a diversity of jobs involved in the area. Does that help out at all?
Yeah, and San Antonio came up a lot, and so did, remember the Coors Field in downtown Denver? That had a similar feel to San Jose as well.
And another question on that question, we did ask several times and never got a real answer on what the mix of jobs would be, because they gave us a jobs number. This would produce this many jobs, and we said, well, what are the quality of these jobs? What are the pay levels of these jobs? And we never quite got that.
Yeah, and a lot of the, at least with the Good Neighbor Committee, from my recollection, the jobs was kind of focused on two conversations. It was, the first part of that Good Neighbor Committee process was really to kind of digest the economic impact report that was around the ballpark, what was going to be the direct and indirect economic impacts, and then the fiscal impact to the city. And that had kind of a mix of core jobs it would bring to the surrounding area. So there was some discussion of that. The other thing, just because everyone brings up San Antonio, where, the San Antonio walkway, that was probably the one area that there was actually contentious, among the Good Neighbor Committee, because some really wanted something like that, and others felt it was very cookie cutter, and that whatever we were going to do, if we were going to make that kind of investment and do that, we should really be focusing on, our existing small businesses taking advantage of that and them bringing jobs to the area. But it was really limited to kind of that level. Yes, Shiloh?
And apologies, I had to step out for a moment, so you may have touched on this. And I think Harvey mentioned this, but I'm interested in the traffic and circulation conversations that you all had, in particular knowing that SAP, generates a lot of traffic, and that one might imagine a ballpark would as well, and just how mature those conversations were with players like SAP in like discussing some concrete ways to, whether it's through a TMA or just pushing people more to transit. I'm just wondering a little bit more about those conversations. And again, apologies if you touched on this while I was out.
I think I tried to earlier. They had some nice alphabet letters for it. I forget exactly what it was. TPMP, yes, that was it. Yes, TPMP. They brought in the people that were currently working with SAP to explain to us how they would get the number of people in and out of the area because of SAP. And that was quite fascinating, really, and how we would expand it, because, at that point, SAP is like, you're only worrying about getting 17,563 people or something like that in and out of the arena. And so, a ballpark was going to impact that by, at least double or triple. So I think we did spend a number of sessions looking at traffic patterns and that sort of thing. So if you can go back and look at maybe some of the handouts, that might help you a little bit, I'm hoping.
Yeah, that was a big topic in our meetings. And then somebody came up and reminded us when we had the race car events in downtown, and that was bringing in 100 to 150 people a day. So we're talking only about 150,000 people, and we're only talking about, let's say there was a concert downtown on a Thursday night, like Music in the Park, and 20,000 people, concert at SAP, and 38,000. That was still half of what we were looking at. So, but that conversation came up a lot, and we're probably, everybody in here is going to have to tackle that issue again, because it was never resolved. There's lots of moving parts on this.
And at the time, I had fallen off a bike in 2007, broken an arm, and finally gotten back on my bike around 2009. And as I discovered in trying to go through that area, there were a lot of obstacles. There were not a lot of safe routes for me because I was very terrified of having another accident. And so we talked a lot about that, about creating bicycle separation from the traffic patterns, and also making sure that whenever possible that any place that a bicycle could go would not have a barrier a wall or whatever, there would be some way for bicycles to go through.
All right, we are at time, so I want to thank all 5 of you for participating. And we're going to move along to the next agenda item, which I'm going to introduce Matt Ramey.
Thanks, Lee. Good evening, everyone. As we transition, I want to maybe step back a little bit to a little bit of the conversation that we had at the last meeting, where we were asking about information that you all wanted to know about and information you wanted to hear. And some of that we just talked about, which is what's the history of some of the planning efforts that have happened in this area, and how can we build on those efforts as this group and as the public engagement around this project moves forward. And so what I'd like to have us spend a couple minutes doing is think about some of the existing conditions information that you all would like to see and you all would like to get. We, as you all know, we had conversations between meetings with as many of you as we could, and we'll follow up with everyone, especially those who we haven't spoken with. But it came up a lot that there's data and information you may want that would help you and help you understand not only what's going on now, but begin to think about both the opportunities that are that exist here, as well as potential impacts to be able to mitigate those impacts. What we have done, we've spent just a little bit of time on our own as a team beginning to think about this. We've organized the information that we could provide into a series of buckets that we have here. Land use, including things like what are the proposed projects that are currently in the Diridon area that are currently happening. Housing, the number of housing units in the area, the mix of rental and for sale housing, affordability levels, the income of residents who are in this area, in the Diridon Station area, but not only that area, sort of if you think about rings around it and rings of impact/benefits from this. Employment in the area, we just talked about types of jobs, jobs in economic development, the demographics, environment and ecology, including air quality and noise, the park and open space network, including what's here now and what is potentially planned in the future, and then of course transit and transportation. We are going to come back at the next meeting and talk a bit more about transit and transportation, including some of the big investments that are happening and planned for the Diridon Station area. So that's really a preliminary list of buckets with some of the things we've heard already. But what I'd like to do now is maybe just have us take a few minutes and brainstorm, and you all can throw out some types of information that you would be interested in. We can maybe talk about this not only topically as buckets, but I think one thing that might come up is analysis and potential. How do we look at benefit? How do we look at impact? That's I think we can take those recommendations now. Those will take longer for that conversation to evolve. And what we're really thinking about now is what's that background, that existing conditions information that you think you might need or want to see at this point, and we'll do our best to get as much as we can to you in as short a period of time as we can. So with that, if either ideas or if you have questions about this information, and a lot of this is really for you all as a group to have in your pockets to think about what's here rather than for us to sort of lead and direct. Okay. Yes, John.
We don't have, looking at the schools, the school impact, the number of kids in the school, what's the traffic pattern around schools, level of school support that's there, are there literacy programs, SNAP recipients, that kind of lets us know about the level of poverty, hot school lunches.
Okay. And Dave is jotting these down over here, is why I don't have a pen and I'm not scribbling frantically. Okay, Jean.
Jean Cohen. Lee and Harvey touched on this a little bit, but I think it would be extremely helpful to have a formal analysis of the types of jobs that are expected to be created from this project, both on the construction and on the operations side, and not just a total number of jobs, but the type of jobs we expect to see generated in terms of salary, and also how many people we actually think we have in the community to fill those jobs, and where we might need to look elsewhere in order to accomplish the project.
Okay, and so that's a sort of a future analysis with some, would sort of the information on the types of jobs that are here now also be beneficial, as well as the residents who can fill those jobs?
Yes, and Harvey also added that we might want to know what type of housing all those workers would need, and if we would be able to accommodate them, or if we already are accommodating them.
Types of housing in terms of?
For the workers who would be.
Income, or type as in like unit size?
Both.
Okay, let's keep moving around this way, Shiloh. And I can't really read, my eyes are not so good these days.
I'm wondering if you could just clarify if a few of the categories that are up there. So for transit and transportation, does that include, like, what's the current mode share, stuff like that?
These were buckets without us proposing anything. So I think if mode share is something that you wanted information on, that is a great thing to throw in there. So
Okay,
we weren't trying to do anything more than
Okay.
ideas. So
All
mode
right.
share.
So then I'll throw out another one on the jobs/economic development, the composition of businesses in the area in terms of, like, are we talking about Chipotle, Chase Bank, and Starbucks? Or are we talking about thrift stores that are family-owned? You know, what does the business composition look like in terms of ownership in particular and the types of businesses?
And now, or now and future?
Like, I'm thinking existing conditions now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just want to clarify all these points to make sure we get it. Leslie.
So with the land use piece, I'm really interested in the future as it relates to heights. That may have been discussed a lot before, but just really interested in what opportunities there are for that. And also, you know, understanding maybe just a little bit more of what we know that the Google site's only going to be a piece of this, but understanding more of the 240 acres, what's in there. There's the arena, there's some arena parking, how does that work? There's the station and the station parking, and what are the opportunities around that? So not just what the current land uses are, but what we have to plan around.
Okay, so sort of some of the givens that we have there, and what we expect to stay, and then what might change, and what projects are in the pipeline. Okay, and I cannot read this.
Laura Winter, St. Leo's
Sorry, Laura.
neighborhood, that's okay. I want to make sure historic preservation of historic resources gets addressed here. It's an area that historically San Jose hasn't done all that wonderful of a job with, and I'm concerned with the speed at which this is moving that it's going to be overlooked.
Okay. All right, Sarah.
Adding to what Jean said on finding out about the breakdown of jobs, I'm interested in the quality of those jobs throughout the spectrum with Google and their contractors and any also sublet properties. And then also interested in thoughts on a pipeline to those jobs.
Yeah, I think it's helpful to look at.
Am I next? Yeah.
Nope, yes.
Teresa Alvarado Whisper. I agree with much of what's been said. The only thing I would add is current and proposed urban design standards.
Okay, thank you. Jeffrey.
Yep. I think it would be good to have the inventory, at least for the nearby area in particular, of the units that are under the apartment rental ordinance. So rent-controlled apartments, could be at risk of being Ellis acted, taken off the market. And so I think it'd be helpful to have an inventory of that. And then also, MTC's done some good analysis of looking at what the impact looks like in terms of traffic for each additional job added. So I think it's a useful analysis to have that as well. And certainly, I'm not asking you guys to do like a full in-plan analysis, but, you know, there's some good literature out there about, with the tech growth in particular, what kind of jobs that leads to in the local economy, you know, the growth of service jobs. And I think there's some good analysis connecting that to what happens with displacement and the traffic needs and all the rest of it. So there's some good secondary literature that'd be good to have the group see.
Okay. And I just want to make sure everyone is speaking into the microphone so it gets recorded. All right, Matt.
Thanks. I second all of what's been said here. I think in particular, having a better understanding of the housing needs within the city would be helpful context. I think in terms of some of the transportation elements that have been talked about, knowing about the rates of car ownership that exist for folks near the station already, since we know that those typically are areas that have much lower rates of car ownership, and some of the mode split that occurs currently would be very helpful. And I think as well the existing policy context. For example, my recollection is that after the adoption of the station area plan, there was some work that was going to proceed around some of these TDM, TMA sorts of activities with SAP. I'd love to know how far that conversation has gotten, since those seem like particularly opportune issues to address through this process.
You just broke the rule and did 3 acronyms in one sentence.
I apologize.
Okay. Only 2 per sentence, everyone.
Oh man,
sorry.
My acronyms.
We can come back to you if I messed you up there.
Shoot. And I think in terms of existing policy context, it'd be helpful to know what some of the existing policy goals and priorities are for the urban villages, because the city has made some important goals around what they're looking for urban villages that could be applicable here in terms of mix of homes and jobs, affordability goals for those areas, vibrancy, public amenity sorts of goals that might be a helpful context here.
Maria Noel.
Completely agree with everything that's been said. Just to pick apart the housing piece, I'd love to see what we already know about homelessness, and thinking about potential impacts of a project this size on homelessness in the city and the region. Just want to call out the displacement. It's been called out, but want to highlight that in gentrification. There's already been work that's been done regionally in that area, so let's not reinvent the wheel, but look at what academics have already created. In terms of workforce and job quality, I'm also interested in looking at what we know about the workforce in tech, in terms of diversity, who we're actually talking about currently is employed, so we can think about who we're talking about would be coming in to the city, both direct employees and also subcontractors.
Thank you. Next.
Hi. One of the things I'd just like to mention is that Delmas Park just had Communiversity in there for about 18 months. And so that a lot of the information you're looking for regarding housing and income levels of the current residents within that southern section that is the residential area has already been done. Great. So I'm hoping that you know about that report and it gets incorporated and brought here. The other thing is the development proposals we've seen lately have all been for housing. And I know that part of the goal of this area is to be an economic engine for the city. And so trying to help us figure out how we're going to balance the immediate projects, which are definitely housing, and making sure that we don't lose opportunities for business development as we go ahead and approve housing projects within this area. And then I'd also like just if somebody could give a brief presentation on the Delmas Park development plan that the neighborhood worked on for several years, where we kind of go block by block and talk about what we would like to see developed within these different plots. We want redevelopment. There are a lot of obsolete uses within our area that really, it's time for them to go. So I think that that would be good for everybody to see too, what we've done as a neighborhood in that area.
Great. Reginald and then Sandra, and then I think we need to move on unless anyone else has. Oh, okay. Oh, sorry.
Well,
Seat over there.
mine is the first comment I made about the displacement. Having the statistics or the information around how many homes might be displaced and how many jobs might be displaced, and what's possible around sustaining that. I mean, whether the job might have to, the business might have to move, but can it come back? The person in the house might have to be removed, but will those people have opportunity to be living in the same type area? And what does that mean, and how is that answerable?
Right.
You know,
So
just the statistics around it.
So it's not only existing, but best practices.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Hey, Sandra.
Hi, Sandra Weber, Plant 51. Yeah, just to piggyback once again on what I said last time, was just to make sure that we have the latest data trends for that traffic area. I know the other night I was coming home and it took us 20 extra minutes because a concert was going on at SAP. So just integrating communications platforms with however you're going to get home. And then specifically White Street, what the plans are for White Street moving forward. It's right there next to Diridon Station. And if you forecasted in your plans any, like the use for PEVs, that wasn't, I noticed that it couldn't have been on the Good Neighbor Committee because it really wasn't a thing back then. But how do you allow for and encourage that? Because I see more of that use.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Some is getting into some policy and some questions, which is good. We're getting ahead here. All right. Last two, I believe.
Yeah.
And then we'll keep going.
Maybe I'm being extremely naive, but I would like to know what Google would envision as the ideal campus for them, and maybe get some preliminary design drawings so that we could kind of get our head around where they're at, and see how we can integrate their ideas into what we need as neighborhoods and, businesses and that sort of thing. So, I'd like to kind of pick their brain on what they see as the ideal thing, which is going to be different probably than what a lot of us here think, but I think we need to have that on the table so that we can, see what we're dealing with.
If you were the last speaker, that would have been the perfect segue to the next section. But we have one more.
So we looked at a lot of things in terms of creating parks, et cetera, open spaces in the Good Neighbor Committee, but we were doing it at a much less dense area with a lot fewer residents being moved in. I'm concerned about, we probably need a presentation on how we can create the open space for these new intensified residents. Because frankly, the cost of the land has now skyrocketed. My house was, $500,000 back when we were doing it. Now it's over $1 million now. So the cost per acre is intense, and the fact is that the use of land for businesses and economic purposes will often trump parkland.
All right, so let's, this is really helpful. Let's move on to our next section. What we heard is a variety of things. Some is existing data that you need, some is analysis that you want, and then some's best practices. Suffice to say, there's a lot of information here, probably not all of it by the next time. But we will definitely try and get some information out. If you feel that you know of or your organization has developed some of this data and information that you want to share, please send it to us so that we can incorporate that in. Just about that?
It's about Jean having her card up. I just have a process question.
Oh, okay.
Hi, it's Jean Cohen. Is this the last time we're going to be able to generate ideas for this list, or will there be multiple opportunities?
It is not. This
Okay.
this is very preliminary, mostly background, and I think we absolutely will get into later, this is the segue, thank you, that we will get into what types of analysis what we're looking at, what Google's going to be thinking about, your ideas, types of analysis that you want to see. So we'll absolutely get into that later on. Okay, let's transition here. As you all know, when we had phone calls with many of you, I think one of the probably the most common thing that was mentioned is that you all really wanted to see and understand a little bit more of what your role is, how you're going to work together, and what you're going to be producing over the next 6 to 7 months. And I want to start with essentially a slide that we presented last time, which was more broadly about community engagement, but really I think focuses a lot on your role here. So one is to clarify community interests, aspirations, and concerns. You all know a lot about what's going on in the community collectively, and to really clarify that information and feed that into the process is part of your role here. The second is to help identify potential options and solutions relative to the project, the Google project coming forward. The third is to serve as a sounding board for development concepts. The fourth is to help ensure that diverse perspectives are included in the decision-making process, not just the folks here, but really beyond those here that you all are representing more than just yourselves. And then the fourth is to assist in project understanding and engagement. Okay, we talked about that before. Now, digging a little bit deeper, there are some key questions that the team has developed that we think we need help with during this process. The first is, what would you like to see in the Google development itself and in the Diridon Station area? Now, clearly, we and the city and Google are going to have to present some of that information on what they are planning. It's, there's nothing really at this point, but it's going to be evolving and an iterative process. The second is, what community benefits would you like the Google project to consider? And this is, I think, one that we've talked about quite a bit, even just at the beginning of this concept of there's development and the community should have benefits from the development that's happening. Those benefits can take a whole wide variety of forms. And what we want to hear is what are the benefits you all think that should be included, the community benefits, very broadly, that should be included in the Google project. The third is that since preferences of things that you want to see have financial value, some things cost more than other things, what's the relative importance of one compared to the other? How do you value different benefits? And it's really a trade-off exercise. And so there's no answer, but we do want to get input from all of you on the relative importance of these decisions that are being made. Now, of course, there are, not only is this a tremendous opportunity that many of you have spoken about, but there are also challenges with what's happening here. There are concerns. There's concerns about traffic. There's concerns about jobs. There's concerns about gentrification that you all have mentioned already. And so what are the key challenges or issues that you think need to be addressed in the area? And as the Diridon Station develops, and then what are the potential models, solutions, or options that should be considered? We certainly can present some of those options, but you all know some, have ideas as well, and we really want it to be a dialogue. Okay, so that's kind of digging deeper into some of the questions. So what are we going to end up with here? And granted, this is still iterative. It's still something that's being developed, but we expect that from the SOG process, there is going to be a report that documents the conversations and the work and the direction and the ideas that you all have given. So we expect that there will be a report that has an overview of the process. We expect that there will be input from all of you on aspirations and preferences for the Google project, and we expect to organize this in some way by topic. This is a really preliminary first stab at some of the topics and the subtopics. But for example, land use and design. How do you create a great place? What's that mix of uses? How are those uses organized? What's the intensity of development? the design character, aspirations and preferences for that would go under that topic. Housing and displacement, affordability requirements, right of return, displacement benefits, recommendations, aspirations for this as well. Parks and public spaces, the types of public spaces, design ideas, how they integrate together. Transportation, bicycle pedestrian network ideas, transportation improvements, transit, traffic mitigation ideas, sustainability, targets, utilities, different building design. We heard at the last meeting about bird-safe design, so that's an aspiration that could come up through this. Jobs, economic development, and education, including the job mix, job training, educational programs, et cetera. So clearly, this is information that there's going to be a back and forth here, where we're going to need to be feeding you some information of things that we know, and you all need to be giving your aspirations, feedback as well. And then we expect that what's happening here, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in a minute, is one of multiple phases that are happening on into the future. And so what we do want to get also feedback on is what should the ongoing community engagement process be, to make sure that, because no one at the city thinks that this is the conversation, it's going to end at the end of these 9 meetings, and there's not going to be any future engagement around this. It is an ongoing conversation, and we want to hear what your ideas are about what that engagement process should be to make sure that the community continues to be engaged in the process. For decision making, so the SOG and other community input is going to be shared with the development team, which is the city development team, which is really city staff, and they are going to ultimately be making recommendations to Google, and then ultimately the decider is the city council. So this group is providing aspirations and ideas, and this is one of multiple ways that input is going to be received in this process. We're going to talk later about workshops, stakeholder meetings, focus groups. So there's going to be a whole engagement process that's going to be going on starting relatively soon in parallel to this. So this is going to be one input into the process, but there's going to be others as well. The input that's received is not going to be essentially winner take all, where there's going to be a vote, the majority vote rules, and all other opinions kind of get put by the wayside. That is not the way it's going to happen. There may be voting on general direction, but what we want to do is make sure that the report that comes out of this group is true to the diversity of thoughts and ideas that the group has. Clearly, moving towards consensus is what we want to do, but we also recognize there's 38 of you. You have tons of ideas, and we don't want to leave any of the ideas out. So even if there's minority ideas about something, we want to make sure that that's represented in the process. So we want to really make sure that the diverse opinions and the degree of agreement is going to be communicated on. Okay, now, the comment raised earlier about the slides being too small and not being able to read them. I can't read them now. Point taken, yes. I agree. All right, this, if you can read it, is, I honestly, we will get this out to you in a more legible format. I'm really sorry. Yeah, I'm gonna walk over here so I can actually see this as well. We've organized our work essentially into, and your work into essentially 3 phases. The first phase is background, exploring, visioning, generating ideas. The second phase is really diving deeper into some of the topics, the topic areas in more detail to develop the aspirations and ideas for you all. And then the third phase is drafting the report content and making sure that we're representing everyone's ideas accurately in there. We've done our orientation meeting. Our first meeting is tonight. Let me just kind of talk quickly just about the flow from here in just a little bit more detail. So the meeting after this is really going to be about the vision, overall vision, and challenges. We are going to have we're going to give you some more existing conditions information, some of the information you wanted to hear. We're going to have Google give a brief overview on sort of their aspirations, I guess. It's not a plan, but really just, I'm going to mess this up, so I'm going to look at my notes here. It is in inspiration and design principles. So big picture. So what's inspiring Google with this, at this point in their preliminary thinking? And then the next meeting, meeting number 3, we're going to talk some about the rail and station planning, but then what we really want to do is allow all of you in a more structured way to share your ideas. You all have been thinking about this. You have, some of you work for organizations. You have platforms already about this. We want to be able to actually have you all share that in brief sort of TED Talks. So we'll talk more about that a little bit later, but we really want to give it up, give the microphone up to you guys and let you state positions, state ideas, and then what we want to do is take all of that and organize it in a way topically so that we see sort of the full body of what everyone is thinking. From there, we are going to talk, we're going to have another presentation by Google on their preliminary design concepts. So they'll have a little bit of time based on everything that you've heard so far. And then, and I'll talk about this in a second, we are going to have a series of subcommittees. And those subcommittees are going to be on different topics. They're going to be working sort of in parallel to this, and then they're going to be coming back in and feeding ideas to the group, and you'll be discussing those with a variety of different topics. That's the next 4 meetings, and then we get into the last 2, which is the report. So there's a lot to do. There's a lot of information. We know that, and we're trying to structure this in as logical a way as we can. So, again, based on input, the comment was made by many of you that these meetings are essentially 2.5 hours. There's 38 of you. There's only 9 meetings. If you actually do the math, it actually doesn't give a lot of time for conversation. And so what we took that to heart, and we decided that we should have deep dive solution groups, subcommittees, but looking at different topics. So members of the SOG, it'll be voluntary, can meet on different topics. Our proposed topics are up here: parks, public space, sustainability, safety, transportation and traffic, land use and design, jobs, education and economic development, housing, displacement, and gentrification. No particular order here. And what we are hoping is that folks will volunteer for 1 or 2 of these. The meetings will occur between the regular SOG meetings. They're volunteer groups. If you don't want to do any of them, you don't have to do any of them. The meetings would be open to the public to listen. It would be like a subcommittee, so it'd be considered the part of the Brown Act. Essentially, this is the opportunity for you all to work in smaller groups to dive deeper with the help of the city into specific topics. It's a proposed idea. We definitely want some feedback on your ideas about this, on whether you think this direction makes sense. Okay, so with that, that was, I think last time you felt like it wasn't enough information, and I don't know, maybe this time you feel like it's too much information. Opening it up just to sort of some comments, you can start putting your cards vertically here. Is the role clearer to you now about how you're sort of operating, how you're operating together? Do the solution groups make sense to you? Are they a good way of exploring topics in more detail and bringing information back? And if not, what do you recommend? And then, does it make sense about does the flow of meetings make sense? And are there any major topics that you see that are missing here? And we can certainly add those in. Okay, I'll give you a second to ponder. Turn your cards vertically. Yes?
Can you turn the options back so we can see those, right?
This one?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. That I can do. And let me just also say that, you know, as with any process, you start on the process, and we can make course changes. So if we feel like we're starting, it works, but then we decide to add or modify, you know, that's always on the table. So we don't have to, you know, we should definitely start on a course, but we can also change courses later. All right, last time I started this way, this time I'm starting this way. Matthew.
Hi, Matt Warren with the Law Foundation of Silicon Valley. Throughout this schedule, this SAG meeting schedule, there is a community engagement process, correct?
Correct.
And those are simultaneous?
Yes, they're going to be happening in parallel.
And the comments from those will also be included in the report to staff?
Yes, it's going to be a report, and we're going to have separate reports from those engagement activities so that there's multiple inputs to this. And of course, you all will have that information as well and can participate and invite your friends and neighbors to those.
Great. What does the report look like? Do you have an idea?
We tried. You know, I'm going to try answering this. Unlike, so you know, I think it's a dig here. I think it is a challenge because we don't know at this point the direction that the whole conversation is going to go. You know, I would expect that it would be organized essentially topically, and what we would try to do is identify in as much detail as we can the aspirations and ideas that the group has come up with. Some of it may, you know, we want it to be directional. We don't want it to be just a laundry list of aspiration that you can't do. So we definitely need to spend some time thinking about how to prioritize. But I would see it as a series of what is the topic that is, you know, pick a topic, what is the issue or the concept that you're interested in, and then what are the different approaches that the project could take. Now, I think that because we also are going to have a very specific project in front of us that we're going to be able to react to, there are going to be specifics about in reaction to that project for those specific topics. So you know, the real answer to the question is I don't have here's a perfect example, and we know exactly what it's going to look like. So I think there will be some back and forth, but we're sort of getting a clearer idea of a list of recommendations. Okay, sir.
Okay, first of all, you asked if this was helpful. It is a lot of information, but it's starting to shape into something that looks a little bit more like expectations of the group, so thank you for that. You're welcome. When Nancy was speaking earlier, you made some reference to, I forget your words exactly, but the group of us will be responsible for developing the community benefit agreement, something along those lines. Did you mean this group of people? And the reason I ask that is because with the non-specific plans by Google and you know, the weightiness of the things that the community at large is going to be looking for, the amount of work to even break into these specialty groups may not get the information out there that we need.
Yeah, just to clarify, so in 2018, the work of this group will be very important in providing input to the memorandum of understanding that the City Council will consider toward the end of 2018. It'll not be the only input because, of course, city departments will have input, others will have input. But if I have to say, the reason we want your answers to those 5 questions is so that we can have that as we develop this MOU partnership agreement with Google.
Right. And then I think the thing that we're going to talk about in the next section is that, and we mentioned before, is after the MOU, there's a whole series of other steps getting progressively more detail. So the MOU, you know, which is 2018, is at the higher level.
Okay.
It's at the more aspirational level, and then we'll be diving into more and more detail as
Great.
we go further.
Because community benefit agreements obviously have much more legal undertones and things like that.
Exactly.
And then one last question, if I may. I love the idea of the solution groups, just to go deeper. synthesizing information just from those groups is going to be a fair bit of requires some administrative support. I'm assuming we can get some of that from somewhere. Right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we're not going to just send you off and say, go do your thing and come back.
Harvey's volunteered.
There we go. Right. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome, Bill. All right, John.
Part of the work we do at PACT is doing a lot of kind of getting into the neighbors, hearing from voices that are marginalized and on the periphery. And a lot of those concerns that they're bringing up are just like kind of daily concerns that affect people in daily life. And those who are on the margins are the ones to kind of hit, the most. And so to me, it seems like we might want to think about impact, some kind of an impact report or some kind of, how are we going to measure the impact on the most vulnerable, the poor? I think that's, to me, I mean, it kind of weaves through a lot of those pieces, but I can't be at every one of those meetings, but does it need to be a separate piece or do we need to kind of have that kind of question responded to in each of those groups? I'm not sure. So it's a process question, but it's also a content question, so that voice and that specific piece is somehow responded to. And again, I just want to just kind of underscore the other piece that's missing from the potential topics is just education, public education. What is that, how is that going to impact existing schools? I mean, we already see a huge drop in students coming because of the high price of housing. There's all these things that are intertwined, but there is that piece about public education that a lot of our members, people who we're working with, are concerned about.
And just really quickly, Matt sort of touched on it, but I don't want anyone on the group to think that the list in front of you, land use, housing, is by any stretch the buckets that we're putting you in right now. In the next meeting, the meeting after, you're going to go through an exercise to create those buckets. This is just kind of our take on what we think it's going to be based off of the last meeting. If we want to spend a lot of time on pothole covers over the sewer, we can do that. It's really your decision on what those buckets are going to be. So by no stretch of the imagination are these limited to that.
And just very quickly, one thing, John, that you brought up, which sort of goes back to Matt's question, which is one of the outcomes of this could be some recommendations about things for further study that you want to look at, because we're not going to be able to cover everything at this point, and we're not going to have all of the detail because we're only getting to the MOU phase. So a list of, we want a series of studies on different topics moving forward, I think could be helpful as well. All right, Kathy.
Hi.
Sorry.
One of the things I'd like to consider for another potential topic, though, would be basic quality of life issues for the people who are living in the areas around Google. I think that there's a lot of concern for populations, different populations in general, but I do think that those of us that live adjacent or within the footprint have some concerns that I think we should be able to discuss and think of solutions for.
Okay.
One thing that Bill's comments really reminded me is that we didn't articulate the need for all of us to have a baseline understanding of community benefits agreements, and that this process, though this is unique, this has been done in other places across the country, thinking about even locally, Oakland Army Base, thinking about the Facebook CBA. And so I think being able to share some of that information and really make sure that we all understand what a CBA is, how it works, and what it could look like for us here.
Charlie Foss, San Jose State. One of the things, Google's sitting up in Mountain View today. Can we get input from the city of Mountain View and find out what's worked up there for them? What would they like to do if they could redo some of the time, roll back the clock? What advice and counsel can they give us as we craft this? It kind of grew organically up there, and we're starting from zero. But I think there's some things we can learn from their existing community about what they're getting, what Google's giving them, or what is being provided in the community, and what's going right and what's going wrong.
Yeah, we can certainly, we know the folks up there, we can certainly reach out if we have time in the schedule for that. Absolutely. Okay. Next is last. Eddie.
Good evening, Eddie Chung from the Silicon Valley Organization. Well, first of all, thank you so much for defining the purpose and role of the SOG. It's clear to me that the solution groups will be doing the heavy lifting in terms of what is going to be the achievable final product here through a strong and robust partnership with Google. I understand that many of the solution groups will be driven by what Google's design and vision for what the Diridon station will look like. But I have a question regarding the jobs, economic development, education piece. Does city staff have any idea of what industry clusters will be focused on in terms of the job training and educational programs? Primarily, is it focused on tech, or are there specific industry clusters that you're focused on? And I'm trying to get an understanding to figure out how we can further engage businesses in this continued development.
Okay. And just to, I want to just respond quickly to one of the things you said, which is that, Google, my understanding of how this is working, and staff, please correct me if I'm wrong here, Google is going to be developing their plans as this group is meeting. So it really will be an opportunity to, as they are shaping their ideas, to help shape what they are thinking. And so the input that you all are giving and the ideas are going to go into what they are thinking as well. So they'll be listening and hearing, so it is a little iterative in that way. So it's not just, here's the plan, respond. There's some back and forth there. Okay, Nicole.
Yes, I just have a quick question. I just wanted to clarify if it would be okay. I noticed we do have everyone's contact through when we're sent updates of when meetings are. Can we contact each other, like with articles or information? Is that okay? Is that
we
not okay?
actually, we're going to get to that.
Okay.
So great question. Hold off just a couple minutes, and then if we don't answer it well enough, you can ask.
Okay.
Okay. Next.
Nathan Hope, Silicon Valley Leadership Group. Can you talk a little bit more about the solution groups, and perhaps you don't have a model yet, but each one of these subject buckets, there are week-long conferences that go into these, and I think that, at least for myself, very interested and excited about this. I would want to be at all of them. That, of course, comes at my wife, who's probably watching at home right now, wouldn't want me to say that. So how do you envision that coming together? Are you really thinking a quarter of the group will show up at this, or are you waiting to see kind of how it rolls out?
We first want to get, it needs to be developed. Again, the honest answer. We don't know yet. It needs to be developed. We wanted to make sure you liked the idea. Apparently, your wife was sending out these thoughts because we really don't want anyone on more than two. Just to, a limited number for everyone. So you will have to sort of pick and choose which ones you want. They're all open to the public, so you can also go to them as well. And then, how actually they're going to work when any one of those subtopics you could spend months and months and months on is certainly a challenge. And I think we're going to have to think about it. And we, of course, welcome ideas. If you have been through processes, any of you have been through processes that you have suggestions about how you think it could work, how it's worked well, completely open to ideas.
Okay, thank you.
Harvey. And we'll move on.
I keep hearing Google, and this group was created by the council to look at not just the 40 acres of Google land, but also the entire 248 acres in this area. So the question I have is, this list works fine for Google. The timeline would work fine for an MOU for Google, but high-speed rail is coming through. They're going to make changes to Diridon Station. That will be outside that September timeline, and how will we make sure that whatever other projects are created after this will kickstart, because there's a land grab going on in this area now. How are we going to address that?
Yeah, I think we're going to go on to the next slide, because I think we do have, we want to talk some about relationships here. So let me just sort of go. Kim, this is actually a good transition for Kim to talk about what we're doing now, and then how that can pivot into other work.
Thank you. So what I realized was after I made this key point at the start of the last meeting, I realized there was a lot of kind of real estate jargon and terms that were in here. And so I think it's really important to go over it again, because honestly, all these jargon and terms were totally new to me at one point. And we all want everybody to understand this is a multi-step, multi-year process, and to be really clear about what the process is. So I put together what I called my development sort of agreements 101 cheat sheet, which you have in front of you, with just some simple definitions. And I thought we could just talk through it a little bit. But in listening to the conversation that you just had, I think the most important point I need to emphasize is that where we're at and where Google is at and where we all need to be for the remainder of this year is really at the concept level. Okay, so there's not a particular project that has been defined at this point. Once a particular project is defined under California law, like we know what it is in terms of square footage and uses and densities and where it is and all of that, then it becomes the second phase. And under California environmental law, then very specific impacts are studied. And there's a whole nother community process that really gets down to the brass tacks and the details. That's the normal project review process. The lucky part that we have is we have now this year to sort of be at the concept and vision level, and with the community sort of get to that level where there will be hopefully a project. So I wanted to just hit on a few of these terms here. So the first one is ENA that I mentioned last time, Exclusive Negotiation Agreement. And so this was approved by the City Council last June 20th. And it's basically an agreement that says, it's kind of like dating, right? It says, we're gonna date kind of exclusively for a while and not really see anybody else and see if this is going someplace or not, right? So we have this period now, and I've dated a lot because I got married later in life, so I know about how this works, right? You got your eyes on somebody, you have a few conversations, you go out for a bit. So we're in this period now. The initial period was for a year, and we can extend it for another year. And we can have lots of conversations to check each other out and see if we want to start making more firm commitments. So that's what an exclusive negotiations agreement is all about. So the second kind of agreement we have, and I mentioned this last time, is a compensation agreement. And that sounds great because everybody wants compensation, but who really wants compensation are the taxing entities that, while redevelopment was in place, were not getting incremental property tax. So like the county and the water district and the San Jose Unified School District. So under California law, we have an approved plan to sell properties that were owned by the former redevelopment agency. And these 5 properties, including called the ballpark properties, they were always referred to as the ballpark properties, are redevelopment agency properties. And under the approved plan, they were designated for future development, and we were required to determine the fair market value under current zoning and everything, just as of this point in time. And then if we agree on the fair market value, to sell those properties and give the money to all the taxing entities that have been waiting for it. So that compensation agreement is in the process now of going to the 12 taxing entities. It's already been approved by the city, by the county, by the successor agency oversight board. And so once that document is signed off, hopefully by June, those properties then come to the city, and the city has to sell them by the end of this year, by December 31st. That's what the compensation agreement says. And we pushed it to December 31st because we wanted enough time for this process and for it not to be rushed. So that's the agreement there. So what we're working toward and where your input is absolutely critical is by the end of the year, by November or December, that we would have 2 agreements that would go to council for review and hopefully approval, and they would go together. It's a memorandum of understanding agreement and the purchase and sale agreement. So let me start with the purchase and sale agreement because that's probably the obvious one. The purchase and sale agreement basically just says we agree to sell these properties to Google at this price, and these terms. And we anticipate it would be those 5 successor agency properties, and the price has been determined for those, plus likely 2 other City of San Jose properties. So the purchase and sale agreement would go forward, and that gives us the revenue, and it gives Google the assurance that they're going to own enough of these key properties to have a quality master plan development. So we're going to want to have an MOU that goes with that purchase and sale agreement, and what the MOU is it is a statement of intent, and it outlines what the intentions are of both parties at the 20,000 level. So if we do this right, it says, this is our shared vision of what this is. These are our goals. These are our expectations of each other, including for what this development is going to be at the concept level and for what the community benefits are going to be associated with the development. So that's the MOU and the purchase and sale agreement. And they'll go forward together. Okay, so that's us through the end of this year. Then there will be a process that will be at least 2 years and maybe a bit longer. Hopefully not, but we will take as much time as we need to do it right. At that point, so sometimes after December 31st, Google's going to need some time, right, to take all this input and turn it into literally a project where you file with the city and you say, here is my project application. And that will start the environmental review process. And that will start us understanding a little bit more specifically how we might need to think differently about that Diridon Station area plan. I want to mention also we are studying the height limitations over the downtown in the Diridon area. And so we will know, hopefully sometime this year, if we're going to be able to raise heights in any particular locations, because that'll be important. And so what we're all working toward is the development agreement. Now, the development agreement is sort of like, that's the deal. That is very detailed, very specific agreement. It's sort of like the marriage license with a really serious prenup attached, where you sort of thought of all the different things. So you can see in the description here, I mean, this is a contract. The development agreement will say specifically what the builder intends to build, what they're allowed to build, over what time frame, and it will outline very specifically the community benefits that will be required in the project. So, and hopefully, it'll be two years into this that then we will have the specific deal. The last thing I want to mention is I put non-disclosure agreement there. So in the early stage, if we go back to before June, there was a time there where when a company comes to the city and says, we want to explore kind of maybe going out in public together, but we're not really quite sure. We want to share kind of what we're thinking and learn what you're thinking, whether it's a real estate project or a company that might want to demonstrate a technology in our city. There's a period there where we sign non-disclosure agreements. So some of us involved with this did that. But the minute we issue that memo with that recommendation saying we recommend an exclusive negotiation agreement, then the NDA is no longer in place. So it was a period there of several months where we had conversations about is this a potential match. So I just wanted to be really transparent about that. So I hope that's helpful because it is a lot of acronyms and I'm here to answer any questions you have. Matthew.
Can you share any of the materials from that period when the NDA was in effect?
Yeah, so any materials that were produced are subject to, I think we said on here. So we have shared materials when they requested that we had. But with the product of that was really the exclusive negotiations agreement itself. So that we can send you the link to that. So the memo that was released last year on June 6th for the June 20th council meeting had the draft exclusive negotiation agreement, and it had a schedule attached to that. So the documents, we're just working on drafts of that. We call it the deliberative drafting process, where you're going back and forth, and you're creating something that then becomes public. Yeah, Leslie.
So for the community benefit agreement, so is this above and beyond the standard traffic mitigation, housing impacts, park impact fees?
Yeah, so under CEQA, development projects are required to mitigate their impacts. So the community benefits could include some of those things that are above and beyond city requirements or legal requirements. The community benefits in this process are expected to be embodied in the development agreement in a very, very specific way. So when we get to the MOU, the community benefits will be discussed in the MOU, but then once we know more what this project is, when we get to the DA, the community benefits will be very specific in the DA. I think that's an important point. So the MOU may talk about how we'll determine the value or what the metrics will be, but we're not going to have a project by the end of the year, remember. Once we know what the project will be, then we'll have several years of talking about the specifics, details that will go in that development agreement. And that development agreement, the kind of the leverage, if you will, is this all comes together. The development agreement, the environmental document, and the land use entitlements are all approved at the same time. And then after that, you're in a position to go for planning permits and building permits and actually think about construction. Really exciting stuff. I don't want to bore you, but I think it is, it's important. This is the process that we're starting on. Yes, Jeffrey.
Yeah, a question. So with the actual purchase and sale agreement, would there be contingency? Would that just be that's a straight sale, or there's contingencies in terms of contingencies around successfully completing the environmental review, the planning and zoning amendments, and all the development agreement and the rest of it? My concern is just that we've seen, as you pointed out, with the non-disclosure agreements in our inquiries, trying to find out more about those agreements, received emails that were pretty explicit about Google wanting public officials in meetings about planning around this project to sign non-disclosure agreements. And I don't have the direct quote in front of me, but basically because they didn't want the public process to know about some specific details that were going to be shared in those meetings. I think there were even emails talking about some kind of a large pit that would be dug as a part of the process. All that to say, do you have any concerns, given our lack of understanding of key details about the project, and these questions about what information is being withheld with the non-disclosure agreements, and supposedly these things that the Google staff were so concerned about not getting out to the public? Do we want to be making agreements about sale before a development application goes through? Because that's usually not the norm, I understand, for these kinds of large-scale projects. You'd want a development application before you sign off on all these things. So will you be looking at contingencies within that sale agreement?
Yeah, so I have no idea what you're talking about pits and those sort of things, but the reason I made my point is that the minute that the recommendation was made and all of the public way that we disclosed council recommendations last June, the non-disclosure period was just for the period before then, when confidentiality was required in order to consider even whether to move forward with the recommendation or not.
Well, there was emails after June traded between Google staff and OED staff that talked about getting other public officials to sign non-disclosure agreements before meetings in August and after that. So I don't know if that lines up with that characterization.
Yeah, well, I don't know what you're talking about, so we can
I'm
take
glad-
that
glad to share
offline,
the-
because
glad
I
to share
honestly
the
have no
emails.
idea what you're talking about. So we can, happy to, probably fair question. So
Okay.
let's, tell me later what you're talking about, and I can provide an answer, but I have no idea what you're talking about at this point. We are starting to negotiate what the purchase and sale agreement will be, right? So that is work that will happen over the next 6 months. So at this point, I can't tell you, I don't know what the terms of that purchase and sale agreement will be.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure exactly what that, if you sell this property to Google or any other developer, and something happened in between that it doesn't work the way the city wants, do they
Yeah.
keep the property? Or is there contingencies around the sale? I'm asked, that's it.
Yeah, I don't know how to answer that question. The development agreement, it's very important, and Mary Nancy's more skilled at this than I am. The development agreement in particular will have schedules of performance, and that's where the meat is. Earlier than that, can you help me with that question?
Thank you very much for the question. The long-term nature, when a development comes into play, is usually when you're not talking about anything that's near-term. And in this situation, we're even longer than most times, because we won't have the transit development for another 10 years, right? And we're hoping everything sticks to that time frame. So that's why the development agreement will be the document that outlines what we can do and what community benefits stay there. So I know that there's all kinds of different ways with land use transaction. Every single one's a little bit different. But the DA will be a tool that's definitely needed by Google to secure long-term vesting is the word that the lawyers talk to, that they know that they have certainty about what they can develop, what uses, what sizes, what is the promises what are the promises that go back and forth. So that's why in this case it makes sense, and we have some understanding that it will give us the assurance that we need, even though Google will own the property. And we will have, as Kim mentioned, 2 years, hopefully not a whole lot more, to discuss what happens over that time frame.
Yeah, Bill.
Just a clarifying question, and Nancy, you may have answered
You need
it.
my lifeline, will you stay here just in case?
So Google will own the property or be in the process of purchasing the property before the development agreement is done. And if Google, for some reason, decides they don't need 20,000 people, then they've got the property and it's just an investment. Is that true?
They will own the property. That is true.
Okay.
There are many things that the city controls, entitlements, phasing, that we don't know what we're talking about, but there's a lot of opportunities that we can discuss more over time that can put you more at ease.
But to continue to invest in this project and realize it and spend all the money and staff time and effort, they're going to need some assurance that they have the properties that they need. Or it's going to be hard for them to commit to us. Other questions? Yeah.
Hi, Kim. Could you just provide a little bit more description then for the rest of us about the MOU, how those typically work, what sorts of things are captured in them, and,
Yeah.
and how that plays a part
Yeah,
in the purchase?
sure, because again, we're just starting now to discuss the MOU, and because your input is going to be useful, our completing will lag your process here. It will, typically it's things like, here's our shared aspirations and our vision, values and principles. Here are some of the concepts, things that we would like to see. So concepts maybe related to public space or the mix of uses. It will definitely discuss community benefits. We all want it to discuss community benefits, at this level, not at this level, but it will discuss community benefits. It may say things like, things that we intend to keep studying, like maybe the height limitations of our downtown. It will preview the development agreement, right? So it will say, in the development agreement, we expect to be talking about all of these things at brass tacks. It will talk about the approaches to taxes, fees, and subsidies, for example. So if a key principle here is no subsidies, we expect development to pay full fees and taxes, you know, it'll say things like that. Those kinds, there's probably, you know, maybe 10 or 12 topics that this kind of MOU would have. Google will have expectations of us, right? When they submit their project application, we're going to have an aspirational schedule where they're going to expect us to be able to review and approve, and us not to take, you know, 20 years on their project. So it's our expectations of Google, but this is a two-way document, so we'll also include Google's expectations of us and where we need to perform. It will, I want it to say, continued expectations for community engagement and what that's going to look like. And just to be clear, because this is all kind of personal at the end of the day, you know, Nancy and I are the two of the key people that will be having these discussions with Google, right? So that's why we're here, and we're going to be at all the meetings, and we're listening, and we're going to help translate and help with that dialogue. So we're the ones most immediately that are going to be using the information.
And does the MOU then specifically focus on the properties that would be part of a Google project, or the 240 acres that are part of the specific plan area?
Unclear at this point. I mean, the benefit of having a master developer that we thought was a long shot at one point is that you can do that kind of broader visioning, and especially for the planning of public spaces and natural spaces, and have that connectivity. So that's a topic we'll be discussing. Okay, and if there's other questions, I'm getting the sign, but if there's other questions, you know, just keep asking them, because it's really important to me just to be really clear about what we're doing and where we're going and how we're going to use your input.
Okay, so one of our last items for tonight, and we had a lot of great conversation at the orientation, kind of the broader community engagement strategy, which, you know, this group is a big part of that, but the other activities happening outside this area. So for us, you know, we want to kind of do an enhanced level of engagement, you know, with this project, but I will say, you know, I do think San Jose, you know, really prides itself on, you know, good civic engagement process and good relationships with the community when we do these type of efforts and others. So, you know, our goal with this is we have a very diverse community. They access City Hall, you know, resources in a variety of different ways. So for us to be able to offer different points of access and input into this process. And so, you know, we talked about some of these in the last meeting. I know Matthew, in the Law Foundation wrote in a letter with several suggestions as well, so we've taken this into account. But we're going to be offering some digital tools and a variety of different meetings to have input into this process. And the goal with all of this, I'm going to skip the SAG because we kind of talked a lot about the solution groups. But just as an FYI, we will be doing some walking tours. People really wanted to get on the ground, see things, so they can start having kind of the context. So we will be offering those. Outside, the diridonsj.org website is going to go through somewhat of a transformation in the next several days, so that there's other areas of input. There's going to be a lot more information up there. There's been some limitations on our side with our city website. So bear with us while we get that up. But that's going to be a major component of how we educate, inform, and access different communities, as well as surveys, whether they be mobile platforms, online. Mobile platforms, you know, will be important and one part key, you know, one small part of access into this, but something that we've been experimenting with several different things that we'd like to continue to explore. this is running out of batteries. And then so stakeholder meetings, the citywide workshops, which we've talked about, are going to be outside of downtown. We're going to be reaching out to several of you to hopefully co-sponsor some of these in different areas of the community. And we talked about location, time of day. We're going to be very sensitive about that, as well as some pop-up workshops, just getting into areas that have a lot of people talking, educating about this project, getting feedback. And then towards the end of this process, a community forum, an open house, where we're all involved, working with the community, showing what we've done thus far, getting feedback. And this slide looks a lot better on my laptop. It's kind of faded out a little bit. So to me, this slide makes perfect sense, I'll be honest. This is Dave's very innovative scheduling software, I think, on PowerPoint. So I can see it a little bit better here. So this is kind of just a process diagram right now of how we think things are going to work. So, the red box, this is where we're at now. And so you can see kind of what the SAG is going to do, over the course of the next several months, and how the stakeholder groups or those solution groups, will funnel information back out. I think I was glad that we decided to have the Good Neighbor Committee conversation before the solution group, because you kind of heard, that we talked a lot about concepts and we didn't get into a lot of detail. And this is going to be a little bit different. We're going to want to, do a deep dive. So these solution groups will really help, as well as some of the walking tours and the citywide meetings. And all of that will come into that comprehensive report. So what I'd like to do, because we're going to need help from you guys on a lot of this, is this will probably be somewhat of a standing agenda item for us with this group, so we can give an update. I'm hoping by April 9th, when we come back to you, that we have a lot of those citywide meetings, booked and dated. So we will be communicating with you offline between now and then. But this is something, as we talked about, kind of this group's purpose, ensuring that a diverse group of people have input into this process, will kind of help, give feedback throughout the process. So more to come in details, but this is kind of our initial framework after our last meeting and several conversations with a bunch of you offline. So we're going to do public comment next. One thing I wanted to do last, or just because we had questions about it though, was the Brown Act. So very important. And this is tricky, so I apologize that we weren't able to provide the training tonight, but we had a question about, can we put out information? One of the things about Brown Act that's somewhat ironic is the state legislature put it into place so that decisions are made transparently. They're made in public. And it's a little odd because the legislature does not do that. They're able to caucus and make decisions outside that. But what that means for us, even though we're going to try and build consensus, and we, is that we can't make decisions outside of this room together. So there's 38 of you. Half of that is 19. So what that means is 19 of you can't get together and decide, okay, here's what we're going to do. So I know that's a bit tricky. That also means, for our city council, that means 6 of them can't get together and have a conversation on a specific topic outside that council meeting. They also can't hit a reply all and say, hey, by the way, here's how I'm voting on Tuesday. So I think when we build out the website, there's going to be a portal. There's going to be some resources and a newsroom where if you guys want stuff posted as FYIs, reports, we'll be able to do that for you as staff, so we're sharing with everyone. But I would say between now and, April 9th, it doesn't mean, if Harvey runs into Gene, you guys can't talk about, how wonderful the facilitation of these meetings is or anything like that. But it does mean try to not get into too much substance if there happens to be 20 of you all together in the same room. I'm sure you're all going to see enough of each other, so that probably won't happen. But that is just kind of one of the red flags, because I will say when there is a Brown Act violation, it's very difficult for the city. It's very difficult for the decision-making body as you to move forward from that. So again, I'm sorry to frighten you with that information without the training, but it will be something that we follow up with on the 29th.
Can you mention serial Brown Act violations? Because I can talk to you and then, talk to, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so there is a term serial Brown Act training, and makes it sound like it's a serial murder or something. That would be very difficult to do with 38 of you. It's much easier to do with a smaller group body. But what that means is if Harvey decides to tell Gene, well, here's what I'm going to do on open space, and then Gene happened to talk to 17 people, but then Harvey accidentally told 5 people that, and then all of a sudden there was more than half. So that would probably be fairly difficult given the size of this group. The attorney can explain that much better than I can. But what it means is when you see each other talk, you can talk about the project in concept. You can talk about, kind of a concern or an aspiration. But we're going to get into some substance, and some pretty difficult conversations. And those are best had in this room than outside of the building, basically. That's what I would say at a high level. Melanie?
Yes, Lee, I had a question about the solutions groups. Will those also require Brown acting, or can they be considered ad hoc?
That's a good question, and I don't have an answer on that. But we will have the training before any solution group starts meeting. But that's a very good question. Teresa?
Lee, so to the Brown Act question, I got the whole idea of how many of us in the serial meetings, but what is the actual content? I mean, we all see each other, and 19 of us will end up talking serially just about life. So what is the content? Is it about how we're voting, what we're advocating for, or just, hey, I'm really interested in urban design,
That's a very good question. And so, I apologize if I'm scaring everyone. The stage we're at, I'm fairly certain it would be impossible for us to have a Brown Act violation because we are at this level. We don't even know what the buckets are, right? So, one of you telling another person like, hey, urban design guidelines are really important to me. That's not going to be a Brown Act violation. I also think, in some ways, this group being Brown Acted is a bit of a hurdle for staff, I will suggest, because it's really intended for voting group, like majority rule, so a majority can't make a decision outside this process. And, as Dave mentioned, and what's really important to me and a lot of you that we've spoken with is there's not going to be that situation in this group. There's not going to be a winner take all. And while we might try and build consensus and vote around certain things, there's not going to be that end all get all vote. So I don't want to, I think that would be a situation for much further on down the road, even if it did exist. Sandra and then Bill.
Well, I would think that would impact your signups for the subgroups, right? Because you couldn't have 20 people then on a subgroup.
No, you could not.
My question is simple. I didn't think we were going to be making decisions. I thought we were only going to be crafting ideas.
And that's what I believe is going to happen. And so that's, it is a bit tricky for us, in full disclosure to, we did not go through this exercise. I believe the state kind of updated the Brown Act between now and the Good Neighbor Committee because the Good Neighbor Committee did not go through this exercise. But again, you are correct. We're talking about inputs, ideas. But again, because it is Brown Acted, there's a certain level of kind of transparency and rules that we're going to need to, collectively work around. It's I believe if all of us work together, it won't be a barrier at all.
Behind you.
All right, last question,
All right,
Jonathan, and then
that kind of puts me in a tough situation because I'm also representing Cahill, and I'm actually having meetings with Cahill and Plant 51 to talk about, recap with them some of the meetings that we've had and collecting information from them to bring back to this for the next meeting. So is that a problem?
No, so I mean, you are representing both organizations, so you represent both organizations, and I would say, based off of what you just told me, your information sharing out of this group to other groups of what happened. So it's the same as a council member reporting out to their neighborhood association. So that is not a worry. And again, I hate to raise the red flag without the training, but I just, want to make sure 20 of you don't get together without me and talk about it. All right, Dave.
Okay, thank you all for being so patient. Members of the public, it's now your opportunity to get up and provide your input. I have a few names here. We have about 6 or 7 cards. So we do have a timer up there for 2 minutes, but we'll see how this goes. And actually, we'll probably get out of here right in time, which is fantastic. So Blair Beekman is the first name I have here. And I'm going to ask you to stand right here at this stand so that we can get you video recorded as well.
Thank you. Is this working? Yeah, hello. Hi. Hi, I just wanted to talk about gentrification issues a bit. Currently, I think the mayor has mentioned that he wants to incorporate kind of his own plans for downtown area right now at this time. His work maybe can be a model for yourselves in how to think and work about and work on issues at this time. And with that, he's there, not particularly him, but with the City of San Jose, the VTA, and the San Jose Downtown Association, they've created a Big Belly trash can project that on First and Santa Clara that is meant to scare away the people of that area. And it's simply a broken windows project straight out of the 1980s. And it's very frightening. I'm not happy with it at all, and I felt I should make all of you aware of it. And it has technology that's questionable. It has the health effects that are questionable. And I wrote about 3 things that I hope that you can all just be open to and just familiarize yourself and want to be open to about. Be open that this trash can can be an experiment. Be open to the minimal and no technology of this Big Belly project, and be open to the counseling and health services programs for the people of the downtown area. This is basically a homeless and small-time drug use issue. This is not a violent crime issue, is my feeling. And San Jose has just had an incredible tradition downtown of how to openly communicate and work well with counseling services for their homeless. And please study this and look into this and why I'm so angry at this Big Belly stuff. Thank you.
Thank you, Blair. I also want to remind you all that you have actually comment cards in the back of your agendas. If you have any additional input, there's a comment box at the back of the table that you can leave at there as well. So I had Bill Rankin up next.
Hi, Bill Rankin. I'm president of Save Our Trails and also president of the North Willow Glen Neighborhood Association. I wanted to talk a little bit about the Los Gatos Creek Trail. Currently, it's used by thousands of people a week, and there's a potential for the Los Gatos Creek Trail to go south from Lexington Reservoir up over the hill and into Santa Cruz County. And it also comes down through downtown, as we all know. Currently, there's a couple gaps between Meridian and Lincoln, and then a gap between Ozeri and the Guadalupe trail system. And this group will be dealing with that gap. And I just wanted to mention how important it is to plan the trail through the whole development area here. Right now, it's planned to go on city streets, cross at crosswalks, and I just hope this group really takes the time and comes up with some ideas that Google can deal with to develop the trail fully, to not impact traffic and to allow pedestrians from the north and the south to get to Diridon and the new campus. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Next up is Barbara Goldstein.
Hello, Barbara Goldstein, former public art director, currently developing public art and cultural plans for the BART system, City of Glendale, California, 2 urban villages, and Chattanooga, Tennessee. I have 3 specific points to make. Number 1, I think it would be great if one of the solutions groups actually focused specifically on creative placemaking and urban design. The design isn't sprinkled through different groups without having a real focus on urban design, creative placemaking. 2, I hope you'll think about reuse of historic resources. In Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is a lot poorer than San Jose and therefore has a little bit less leverage, Google occupies the old Nabisco factory. And my third point has to do with, I can't remember what it is. It's okay. So I'll just leave it at that. The third point's very important, actually. There's not one city in California with a population of more than 150,000 does not have a design review board or commission. We do not. We're a big city. We need to have design review as part of the approval process. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Next up is Larry Ames.
So hi, Larry Ames, longtime creek advocate and trail advocate. I'm glad to hear it mention the daylighting of the Los Gatos Creek Trail. The Envision 2040 talked about reducing the vehicle miles traveled and mode shifts. And trails provide a non-motorized transportation alternative. The Los Gatos Creek Trail would come to the Diridon Station. As Harvey mentioned, the daylighting of the Los Gatos Creek is part of this Diridon Station area plan. It will cost money to free the creek there, but it would several millions of dollars, but it would still be a small fraction of a percent of the total project here. Alternatives would cost money too. If you do not daylight the creek to allow a trail to get through the area, Los Gatos Creek would have to have a pedestrian bridge over the Meridian Park, Montgomery Park intersection, which would be quite complicated and costly because you'd have to go from the southwest corner to the northwest corner to the northeast corner with connections, ramps and spirals that would discourage trail usage. If you don't do that, if you had at-grade crossings, then you'd have people at the traffic lights, and that would create, impede the traffic through the area to have traffic impacts. And if you don't do that, then everybody will be driving there, and you have to pay for parking lots and wider roads. So you're going to pay for it one way or the other. So why not have daylight the creek and have create a habitat there, get an extra acre of parkland. The cities and community members have been working for over 40 years to build the Los Gatos Creek Trail. It's this last 1 mile is the challenge. But it is our connection from the neighborhoods to the Diridon area. It's the connections to whatever park that you make in the area. It's connections for people to get to Google. And the creek was buried 50 years ago. And if you do not daylight it now, it'll be another half a century or more before you get a chance to revisit this. So please do it right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Next up is Brian Grayson.
Thank you. Brian Grayson, Executive Director of Preservation Action Council. I was pleased to hear that both Laura and Barbara raised the issue of historic preservation tonight. The sooner that comes further up on the table in the conversation, the better it will be for all of us. You may or may not be aware that in the Diridon EIR that was done a number of years ago for the ballpark, it identified well over 30 historic resources within these parcels. Some of those have since disappeared. But there's others that we also don't even know about yet, and those will be identified in future surveys as this project moves forward. So the sooner this discussion takes place and gets in part of your discussion, the better the decision-making process will be. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Zenaida Sanchez.
Hi, Zenaida Sanchez, resident of San Jose. I feel against the sale of public lands to Google or anybody else for that matter. More so because, these lands at Diridon, we taxpayers are paying billions, tens of billions of dollars to bring here, speed rail and BART to San Jose and to the Diridon area, etc. So we are paying for it, and I think that, leasing the lands and perhaps even tying the revenues that those lands would produce to the rents to be paid for those lands would be a much better solution and for the people of San Jose. And the other thing is that, Google leases a number of properties in Sunnyvale, in Mountain View, and they have, with NASA specifically, a lease for 60 years. They are paying $1.2 billion, plus they are paying $3,600,000 per month to maintain and operate that property, and it is a property that NASA has stated, and it's clearly, it's out there, that they have no use for those lands. So it is good for them, and they're relieved that Google is, paying all these maintenance costs plus, a number of other freebies that they're doing also on that. So I mean, what we're doing is, just giving away extremely valuable public lands, and that they are still not beginning to produce what we will be paying. We have encumbered ourselves, Proposition 1A, Proposition 2016, I voted for that. And now there's two more. RM3 from Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors, that will be a resounding and a first no for me. And Mayor Liccardo today has said, it is in the Mercury News, that he is putting out, waiting city staff, whether there should be some other infrastructure measure in the ballot, for the city of San Jose. Thank you.
Thank you, Zenaida. Next up is Martin Delson.
I have a request for members of the SAG group. This was something that was mentioned at the orientation meeting, and a few of you have complied with it. But for those of us that are sitting in this public area, we can't see your names. Sometimes you're called on Pete, but who is Pete? Who does Pete represent? So please, again, comply with that request that was made at the last meeting when you speak. Also to staff, when you call on somebody, please give us their full name and their affiliation. Or if you just turned up your card and you start speaking, let us know who you are. We're getting to know you over time, but I certainly don't know everybody that's here, and it would help us a lot. So I'd appreciate it if you would comply with that request. Thank you.
That's a great point, Martin. We apologize for that. We'll definitely be better at that in the future. So next up is Marcy Gersten.
Thanks. I'm going to follow that up because it's really hard to be back here. It's not the best room for the community. I have a couple of comments about that, including where public comment was at the very end of this meeting. There was some discussion about that at the last meeting, and as I understood, because I was following the draft agenda, it was originally at one point earlier in the meeting, and now it's at the end. And as you can see, there were a whole lot of people that were here before. I recognize there's comment cards, but it could inform your analysis as you sit here for listening. It could inform your analysis if public comment was in the beginning of the meeting. I'd also kind of like to address the community benefits discussion, because frankly, sitting back there, it sounds like there's a little bit of like different planes going on when people are talking about community benefits and community benefit agreements. And I'm not quite sure we're all on the same page on that. And so I'd like to suggest that just like having folks from Mountain View come and talk about their experience, maybe it makes sense to have a little bit of training or some folks come with their some experience that they've had with community benefits, benefit agreements, what that can look like, and what they've learned from it, because you can have a lot of collaboration to create a community benefit agreement if you know in advance. It doesn't always have to be super contentious or preceded by litigation and all those things that we hear about. So it might be really conducive to collaboration if we were to address that now rather than waiting until a development agreement or close to that. So thank you.
Thank you, Marcy. And I just want to note that our team is taking down all these notes, and they will be represented in the summary. So thank you for all your input. The final name we have is Adina Levy? Levy.
Adina Levin with Friends of Caltrain, and I'm glad to see the recommendation to bring in folks from Mountain View, where Google and working with the city have come up with some innovative solutions, particularly relating to transportation and retrofitting an area to be more walkable and bikeable. That might be of interest here. The other thing I'm really glad to hear from this group is an interest in the relationship of the sports and entertainment venue and the goals to have a more urban and walkable and transit-oriented place. When AT&T Park, when the baseball moved from Candlestick, there was 90% driving in Candlestick, and when they moved into downtown San Francisco, they were moving, and the city worked with them and said, you can have no more than 50% driving when you move to an urban area. And there was discussion, there was negotiation, there was collaboration, and they wound up achieving that goal of changing a business that had been very car-oriented into something that was much more urban successfully. And in this case, the arena isn't moving, but the city is transforming around it. So learning, another thing to consider might be learning those lessons about how to transform into an urban transportation as befitting the new urban nature of the area. Thank you.
Thank you, Adina. Actually, we had one last one here, Catherine Hedges.
Hi, thank you for this opportunity to speak. First of all, I agree with the earlier speaker who suggested that the city should be leasing the land to Google instead of selling it. We need to maintain this valuable asset for the people of San Jose. And the main reason I'm here to speak is that as a member of the disability community, I've noticed that services for disabled people are willy-nilly all over the county, whereas Berkeley has the Ed Roberts Center at a BART station, which is very easily accessible. And if somebody has a hard time with mobility, it's basically one-stop shopping. Instead of having to go all over the place, it's like being able to go to a shopping mall and get all your needs met at one place. And this would be something fantastic to include in the new Diridon Station development. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Barbara. So that wraps it up. I was trying to get a slide up here, but I think this thing, did it just die? There, there it is. Nope. Okay, anyways, so we just wanted to thank you again very much for being here tonight. Thank you for all your time. We just want to, again, recognize next meeting is on April 9th at 6 p.m., and we do have the city's website that will have resources on it. We will be in touch with all of you before the next meeting to share additional information and gather some information, and we'll be here afterwards to answer any questions. Thank you again very much. Have a great night.